The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and we're getting stuck straight into it today, everybody, because Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, joins me live right at the top of the show. And Mark, I believe that you have got an eyewitness after some shocking new details emerged in that Nottinghamshire killing spree yesterday, which you have just announced that we can take live now. So let's go straight to Mark. Mark.
Well, indeed, yes, more revelations about the time frame of what happened here after these 2 young students were stabbed to death not far from here. It appears that the prime suspect in this case tried to get into this particular assisted care living complex nearby, and we can join one of the residents here, Jason Derbyshire. Jason, thanks very much for speaking to us. Yeah. I know this was shocking for you. Yeah. Very early in the morning. Yeah. Just talk us through in as much detail as you can about what you saw and heard.
Yeah, I woke up about 5:15. I normally wake up quite early to go to work. Like I say, I've not been here long. Opened the curtains and there was just some guy stood under this archway, all dressed in black, got a black rucksack, black beanie hat on, just staring at the edges over there. Gone back in my room, had a wash. 30 seconds later, there's really loud banging, trying to get through that window. I didn't see the security guard come out, but apparently he did. The guy asked him, is it a hospital or a hostel? He went, no, it's a hostel. And then he just came back through this archway and just walked off there, dead calm.
But
really calm.
This was the room right next to yours, yeah. Where looking behind you is number 66, and it's the bay window, basically. Yeah. And did you say he was trying to smash his way in?
No, I could hear him smashing because of the bay window. I can only see so much out that window because it's recessed back. But yeah, it was really loud. He never said a word, not one single word. And then, just like I say, he just came in, stood there again, and he just walked off. I thought he was a security guard, I did, until he had all the banging.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen CCTV footage of him at this complex, dressed, as you say, in black, so that absolutely marries up with what you're saying. The police do believe it is their prime suspect. Yeah. Knowing what you know now in terms of what's happened, how's that left you feeling?
Scared.
Because without a doubt, people that are here are people with complex needs and quite vulnerable people.
Yeah, they are. Like I say, I've not been here long. had a marriage breakdown, but this is like a culture shock to me. Really is.
I know, Jason, must be very emotional for you. I can see that because, you know, you've been caught right in the middle of the most horrific of events that you just didn't even know about.
No, of course not. I knew St Anne was bad, but not that bad. You don't expect that on your doorstep, do you? And like I say, when it happened, I didn't even know what he'd done when he'd gone down the road. It's horrendous. Horrendous.
And what kind of support are you getting from the management in this place? No one's reached out to you?
No. No one's asked me if I'm all right. Nobody's come to check on me. No, no one.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that. I mean, when you got the news, as everybody else did, about how these events unfolded, Jason, I can only imagine you must have been absolutely horrified.
Well, yeah, I'm a father. So yeah, it's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. How someone can do that, I don't know. I really don't know. They've got all the lives in front of them, so young.
And when you saw this man, I mean, did he look at that time knowing what we know now, that according to the police, he just stabbed 2 young people to death? Did he look agitated in any way?
No, he looked really calm. Really, really calm. Like I say, he was stood there, and I just thought, he's a security guard. He's waiting for a taxi. And then 30 seconds later, he was trying to get in the building. So yeah, he looked really, really calm.
Well, listen, Jason, I hope you get that help from the management in here, and I really do appreciate you speaking to GB News. I know you didn't want to do it. You've been thrust into the spotlight here, but thank you again for speaking to us. Jason Derbyshire, one of the residents there who saw this firsthand with this prime suspect, Patrick, banging on the window, trying to get in. And of course, the consequences don't bear thinking about had this man gained access to a facility that really is catering for people with very complex needs, people who are, by their very nature, very vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Mark, I mean, this has just landed on us right at the top of the show. It's a fast-paced show. It's a rolling, breaking news story. Can we just get a little bit of clarity on this timeline, Mark, as well? So as we understand it, the suspect tried to get into this facility, a sheltered accommodation facility, after initially stabbing the 2 Nottingham students to death. Is that right?
Yeah, Jason's still with me. He doesn't want to go through the whole interview thing again, but I will just ask him that point. What was the time, Jason?
It was exactly 5:15. Yeah.
And did you look at a watch or something to confirm that? Yeah,
I picked my phone up like I normally do, looked at the time, opened the curtains, because it's summertime, I'm up quite early anyway, used to going to work, so yeah, it was 100% 5:15 in the morning.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, quarter past 5 in the morning. So actually some considerable time after the tragedy in which, of course, these 2 young students were murdered, because we know, according to the police, that the timeline for the emergency calls was 4 minutes past 4 in the morning. We know at some point between 4 minutes past 4 and the time that Jason says he came knocking on the window here, that this other victim, Ian Coates, was found stabbed to death in Magdala Road. And sorry again, Jason, but Magdala Road from here, how far?
It's just around the corner. Right. Yeah, it's just around the corner.
So Patrick, it's very possible then that, you know, this suspect may have gone from that initial site of the stabbing of the 2 students to Magdala Road and then to here, or it may have been afterward. We don't have that exact clarification, and the Nottinghamshire police haven't yet put out that exact clarification as to the timeline they're working to. They just know that at certain times they received calls, at certain times they were told. Obviously, after the event, they weren't told at the time of the event. It was afterwards when the staff here at this facility actually realised that it was clearly, in their belief, connected to what had happened elsewhere in the city, that they called that in and the police joined the dots at that point. So we just don't know whether, you know, he'd gone on to Magdala Road afterwards or before he'd come to this facility. But absolutely shocking and frightening. You heard there from Jason, is very emotional about what unfolded, and you can't blame him, you know, being woken up in the middle of the night, and now the realisation a day and a half or more on from that incident, realising who this individual was and what had happened just a few short streets away.
It doesn't bear thinking about, and I want to thank Jason as well. I'm sure when the cameras are off, Mark, you will pass him on our thanks for talking to us. But we don't need to involve Jason again, Mark, if that's all right, because I see he's very emotional. But if I could just ask you a little bit of a grounding in what we actually know so far.
Yeah, cheers.
Take care.
Cheers, yeah. Good stuff. OK. Thank you, Mark. And just in terms of, Mark, what we know so far, because a lot of unanswered questions at the moment, questions that I think a lot of people will want answering and need answering about the individual believed to have been responsible for these killings. Where are we up to with that in terms of information?
Well, what we know, what we were able to break last night is confirmation that this 31-year-old prime suspect is a West African migrant. He's known to police. He came to the country, we now know, over a decade ago. We believe that he was living here legally. There is a history, we're told, of violence and some mental health issues, but we don't think that this man had a criminal record. So clearly, if that's the case, whatever happened in the past didn't result in any kind of prosecution, or at least a successful prosecution. But there are still questions to be asked about this individual and whether authorities were flagged about the vulnerabilities that this person, this now prime suspect, appeared to have, and you know, his proclivity towards issues, you know, involving the potential for violence. You know, did they know about it? Did they act upon that? What support, if any, was this man given in the years, weeks and months leading up to the set of tragedies that unfolded on the streets of Nottingham yesterday? As far as the official investigation is concerned, well, the Home Secretary confirming that the Counter-Terrorism Command, those counter-terrorism detectives, are still involved. We understand that they haven't found anything yet that points to a terrorist motivation, and that would then instigate them taking over lead for this investigation. At the moment, it remains an investigation with the Serious Crime Command here in Nottinghamshire Police. But if they find anything, and we're told, Patrick, as well, that the suspect has not been cooperating with the detectives, so actually finding you know, relevant evidence from him is that much harder. You know, accessing any electronic devices linked to this individual might be harder. If he's not cooperating, he's therefore unlikely to be giving passcodes or anything like that to his phone. So it can then be difficult to try to ascertain whether this individual has perhaps any links to extremist groups or not. But nothing as yet, we understand, that points to that. But until they know for sure, the Counter-Terrorism Command officers will continue to have oversight and continue to liaise with the Nottinghamshire Police.
Mark, thank you very, very much. It's Mark White, our Home and Security editor, who will be giving us regular updates throughout the course of this show. Just what you heard there, just to recap, was an eyewitness to the individual who's believed to be responsible for the killings, the slaughter in Nottingham yesterday, that knife and then van rampage. The latest detail is that it has emerged that he apparently tried to break in, force his way into some sheltered accommodation, and that is on Mapley Road in Nottingham. And what you were hearing there was from an eyewitness who was clearly in a state of distress and in a state of shock, and we are very grateful for him talking to us, Jason, that just saying that now, knowing what he knows now, it is absolutely horrific and harrowing to think that he was within feet of that individual. The timeline of events is interesting. As we understand it, we were trying to drill down there with Mark, weren't we? But as we understand it, the two students were sadly killed, Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar, and then the individual responsible, believed to be responsible, travelled some distance and either was then around the other road, Magdala Road, or before going to Magdala Road, tried to gain entry into that sheltered accommodation. We will try to get a bit more clarity on that timeline, but as you can appreciate, it is a fast-moving news item. But yeah, harrowing really to think that someone was just within feet of that individual as he was mid-rampage. But there is a vigil taking place later, which we will endeavour to bring to you live for the victims of yesterday's senseless, depraved, merciless attacks. And Barnaby Webber was a student at Taunton School previously, and there's been a statement here from the school. He was one of the 19-year-old Nottingham University students who sadly lost their lives just after 4 a.m. yesterday as he was walking home alongside Grace Kumar from a night out. This is a statement now from the school. So the Taunton School community is heartbroken by the recent tragic news about Barnaby Webber. Barnaby joined us in the nursery and studied here all the way through to the end of the sixth form, leaving just last year. In his long association with the school, he touched the lives of many staff, pupils and parents, and his loss will be very difficult to come to terms with. He was a much-loved, kind and engaging character. That a young man of such promise should lose his life in these circumstances is utterly devastating. And I think that last sentence there sums it up beautifully in a way, that a young man of such promise should lose his life in these circumstances is utterly devastating. In a statement reported by the BBC and the Mail Online, Grace Kumar's family had this to say: Grace was an adored daughter and sister. She was a truly wonderful and beautiful young lady. As parents, words cannot explain our complete and utter devastation. She will be so dearly missed. We were so incredibly proud of Grace's achievements and what a truly lovely person she was. She was resilient and wise beyond her years. Grace was so happy in life, fulfilling her ambition of studying to become a doctor whilst playing top-flight hockey at university. She leaves behind devastated, extended family and friends. And just on those two young people, teenagers, whose lives were tragically cut short yesterday, I think it's it must be every parent's worst nightmare to raise your children, to give them the best start in life that you possibly can, to give them the best opportunities, to do your best to create well-rounded, academic, lovely individuals, and then kind of release them out into the real world, as it were, at university, and to have those lives cut short in just such a senseless, meaningless, brutal act as that, it doesn't bear thinking about. So all of our hearts, of course, go out to the parents and the family of those two young individuals. I've also got a statement now confirming the death of Ian Coates. Ross Middleton, who's the executive head teacher at Huntington Academy, where Ian was a caretaker, said Ian was a much-loved colleague who always went the extra mile for the benefit of our children, and he will be greatly missed. As a school community, it will take time to process this deeply upsetting news. We wish to extend our sympathy and condolences to all those affected by yesterday's tragic events. And just for clarity as well, Ian is believed to have been the man driving that van at the time that the alleged attacker stabbed him to death, took the van and then proceeded to drive that van into a group of 3 people, one of whom remains in a critical condition before he was tasered by police officers and taken out of the van and then subsequently arrested. It's a lot to process at the top of the show there, but just want to reiterate, and we'll be playing that to you a bit later on, an eyewitness account there from an individual who was inside some sheltered accommodation, and that's really the kind of new information that we've got here today, which is that mid-attack, it would seem, mid-rampage, the individual believed to be responsible for that tried to gain entry to some sheltered accommodation that houses, by definition, some incredibly vulnerable people. He tried to climb through a window there. He was rebuffed by one of the occupants and then went on his way. What was fascinating from the eyewitness account, though, was he said how calm the alleged assailant was. And I think that just adds a kind of shocking element to it there. But joining me now is former Detective Sergeant at Merseyside Police, David Lowe, who also worked in the force's counter-terrorism unit. David, thank you for joining me. So many unanswered questions that hopefully in the fullness of time will be answered. I think that the public has a right to know about the details of this individual believed to be responsible. They have a right to know what police knew and what Home Office knew or didn't know about this individual as well. But I think really that the public have a right to know about how safe they are on the streets. But I'll just focus it really on your experience in counter-terrorism, if that's OK. The latest line from Suella Braverman, who stood up and gave a statement in the House of Commons earlier today, was that it's not being treated as a terrorist act as it stands, but that counter-terror forces are still working with the Nottinghamshire police and presumably as well the individual who is in custody, who, as Mark White was telling us, is not believed to be cooperating. What kind of work will counter-terror be doing at the moment?
The key thing really, Patrick, will be looking at what's the motive behind this attack. It's absolutely, as you said, and I was listening to Mark before when he introduced this new story, it's callous. It's just tragic, and this is I think everyone's aware. This is a very, very serious offence that they're investigating here: triple murder and potentially 3 attempt murders when he drove the vehicle. But what they'll be looking at and assisting Nottinghamshire Police is looking at, is there any links to any extremism? And of course, as you said, if he's not giving passcodes and so on, then the technical support will have to do their best to open up these devices and see what he's been looking at. I think that's where the assistance, the counter-terrorism unit will be, because obviously they are more familiar in identifying what is extremist material and what is not, and what if you like, the alarm bells will ring, hang on, it looks like that we're leaning to one thing. And it's more than just, say, Islamist or extreme far-right extremism. When you look at these things, you're looking at other forms of extremism, because now our society is becoming so complex. It's not just very plain that there's just one cause to look at. And, and no one should make assumptions just because this male is black, just because this male is an immigrant, not to make assumptions. You've got to be open-minded, and we've got to be open-minded too, and go with what Nottinghamshire Police are directing us. But that's the key thing they'll be looking at, Patrick. Yeah, and, in your capacity as a police officer as well, I don't know if you necessarily dealt with anything quite like this. This is a relatively exceptional case, but you must have had massive media pressure at times, and presumably huge public pressure as well. We've just heard there some of the kind of victim impact statements from their family members and people who are close to the people who've passed away. What impact does that have on the police? Will there be now some concern, do you think, amongst Nottinghamshire Police, dare I say it, maybe the Home Office as well, trying to think, did we miss opportunities here, and how open and honest about that are we prepared to be? Yeah, I think we sort of look at a lot of incidents now. We were just talking about counter-terrorism. We've looked at individuals who've carried out attacks before. We can look at Salman Abedi and the Saunders report into the Manchester Arena bombing. Opportunities were missed, and we see those things. And then don't forget, we have individuals who carry out attacks. I mean, it's just so sad that only was it last week we were looking at France, where there's an individual who was also very calm when you look at the filming of it. What they weren't dealing with that as a terrorist incident. It's just a tragic event again where children were attacked. So you are looking at those pressures. I mean, I retired about a good few years ago now, and obviously now I'm at Leeds Law School, and part of my research is still terrorism policing, and the roles I'm doing, I keep in touch with it. But I think policing now, there's more pressure from social media, observations. I mean, I go back to the Nicola Bulley case where Lancashire had to deal with individuals who were becoming amateur sleuths, going to the area, tramping over crime scenes. These are added pressures, Patrick, that the police could do without. And that's why I said there's it's that thing of we all have a responsibility not to go to assumptions. But you're right. Of course, there's pressure. People want to know, and are we safe? Were the mistakes made at the Home Office? I mean, Mark, in his report earlier, said, there was nothing really to raise that suspicion on this individual. So we have to look at that really, really carefully. And as I said, there's extra pressure on the police now with people making assumptions and what's being posted on Instagram, Twitter, etc.
Well, exactly. And as well, David, that kind of really led into what we had right at the top of the show, which was that eyewitness to it who was in that sheltered accommodation. And a lot of that information came out because of the advent of new technology with CCTV cameras or Ring doorbells these days, etc. And all of this gets put out on social media. And so it's all out there, really. I suppose it can help, but maybe in some instances as well, it can be a hindrance. But look, David, thank you. David Lowe, who's Detective Sergeant, former Detective Sergeant at Merseyside Police, who also worked in the Force's counter-terrorism unit. Look, just to reiterate, we're going to be playing you a clip again a little bit later on of that exclusive eyewitness testimony that Mark White brought us from an individual there, a very distressed chap called Jason, who was in that sheltered accommodation at the time that the alleged assailant, tried to break into that sheltered accommodation mid-attack. He said that the chap was calm, he was banging on the doors, he was trying to bang on the windows, he was trying to get through the windows, and good grief, when you look at it all now in the cold light of day, it doesn't really bear thinking about what could have been there, does it? But loads of unanswered questions on this attack that we are going to try and get to the bottom of. You can get lots more on this story at our website, gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news website in the country, and it's got the best analysis and opinion, as well as all the latest breaking news. But in other news, more than 9,000 migrants have crossed the channel in small boats this year. Will the government ever get a grip of this crisis? Well, the government has basically admitted now that they're going to miss their asylum seeker target. Who'd have thunk it, hey? Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, in just a few minutes' time, we will be live in Nottingham for the very latest after yesterday's attack and find out as well what the boss of ITV had to say when she got a grilling from MPs over the Philip Schofield scandal. But two big stories to bring you quick fire now, because the latest on the government's battle to tackle the migrant crisis first and foremost. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has admitted that they could fail to meet the Prime Minister's target of clearing the backlog of asylum claims. I mean, who would have thought that that would ever be the case, eh? Braverman was speaking to the Home Affairs Committee on the day that it emerged that more than 9,000 migrants have crossed the Channel on small boats this year. 204 people were intercepted by Border Force on 4 small boats yesterday alone. Viewers on GB News can now see some of those people arriving at Dover. Braverman also admitted that women trafficked into the UK for sexual exploitation could be deported under measures to tackle illegal migration, but she did say that vulnerable women could receive protection by cooperating with the police investigation. I'm going to go now to GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster. So, Catherine, Braverman essentially admitting that they are probably going to miss their target.
Well, yes, there was a lot of argument about different sorts of backlogs, but basically they've got a legacy backlog prior to June. 20 people arriving for June last year, that they said they'd get rid of that completely by the end of this year. But Tim Lawton, who's a Conservative, went through very, very carefully with the numbers, and it seems pretty clear that short of some sort of miracle, there's no way on earth, and the backlog overall is going up and up. Are, of course, the numbers coming in, because we've now had over 9,000 this year. Only a week ago, Rishi Sunak was taking credit, wasn't he, for the fact that the numbers were down 20% on this time last year. But of course, the weather wasn't great, was it? And now the weather has changed, and we had 600 people on Saturday alone.
Yes, no, exactly. And we're going to be returning to this story throughout the course of the day, because that is Suella Braverman all but admitting, or being forced to admit, really, that the asylum seeker backlog is, by the sounds of things, not going to be cleared at all, which will not come as a massive shock to a lot of people. But something has just landed in front of us, which I think is worthwhile you articulating to the nation. Go on.
Well, the Privileges Committee report on Boris Johnson is due to land, we understand, at 9 o'clock tomorrow. But on the Privileges Committee is Bernard Jenkin. He's a Conservative. The Guido Fawkes website are reporting that he attended a drinks party given by Dame Eleanor Lang for Bernard Jenkin's wife while we were in Tier 2 lockdown. So parties were not allowed. They're saying there were drinks, there were cake. Reportedly, the social distancing
was he ambushed by drinks and cakes?
Was not in place. So certainly for somebody that's been on this committee, who's been examining very carefully what has or hasn't happened in Downing Street, for this to emerge is not a good look, to put it very mildly.
This is fascinating. So there was a phone conversation, as reported by Guido, with Bernard Jenkin, who is on the Privileges Committee, and they asked him, according to this report, didn't they, about whether or not he remembers attending a drinks party in Parliament. He says he did not attend any drinks parties during lockdown, and then he was pressed on it, and he says, I don't recall. I mean, this is a terrible look if true.
Yes. Yes, and Eleanor Lang was also asked and would say that she would have to check. But certainly, Anne Jenkin, Bernard's wife, had this drinks party allegedly for her 65th birthday at a time of a Tier 2 lockdown.
And he's been one of the people who's been looking into Boris Johnson as well and everything.
Precisely.
Wow. OK, well, more on this as we get it. Catherine, thank you. Just hot off the press, that. We'll get you a lot more details. Catherine Forster, there, GB News' political reporter. But, yes, we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Could it really be true? The hypocrisy, if true. Well, there we go. Loads more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. We will cross live to Nottingham. There's going to be a vigil for the victims of yesterday's attack at 4 p.m. We will take that live and also give you the very latest up-to-the-minute detail on the man believed to be responsible. And as the boss of ITV, well, she's had her say about the Philip Schofield scandal, and it turns out that's not going away anytime soon. But first, is your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. The top stories this hour. Police have now formally identified all 3 victims of the Nottingham attacks. School caretaker Ian Coates has been named as the 3rd person fatally stabbed in Nottingham yesterday. His van was stolen and then used to target others. 19-year-olds Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar were also killed. A 31-year-old man with a history of violence is still being questioned by police who are trying to establish a motive. And CCTV from Seeleyhurst House residential care home showing a man dressed in black trying to enter a bay window is currently being examined by detectives. We spoke to Jason Derbyshire, a resident from that care home, who was an eyewitness.
Opened the curtains and there was just some guy stood under this archway, all dressed in black, got a black rucksack, black beanie hat on, just staring at the edges over there. Gone back in my room, had a wash. 30 seconds later, there's really banging, loud banging, trying to get through that window. I didn't see the security guard come out, but apparently he did. The guy asked him, is it a hospital or a hostel? He went, no, it's a hostel. And then he just came back through this archway and just walked off there, dead calm. So yeah, it's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. How someone can do that, I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, in other news today, ITV's boss says both parties involved in the Philip Schofield affair repeatedly denied allegations of a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall has told MPs action would have been taken if there'd been any evidence, but there was only hearsay, rumour and speculation. News about the economy and stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth in the UK. The latest figures show it expanded by 0.2% in April, recovering from a 0.3% fall the previous month. The Office for National Statistics says the positive impact of improved hospitality and retail spending was offset by industrial action hitting other sectors. Those are the headlines. More on all of those stories, head to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Looking at how the numbers are stacking up today, the pound will buy you $1.2683 and 1.1696 euros. The price of gold is £1,542 and 88 pence an ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,616 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
I just want to bring you up to date on the very latest from Nottingham after yesterday's knife and van attacks that sadly left 3 people dead. What you have just heard here exclusively on GB News is eyewitness testimony from an individual, Jason, who was in this sheltered accommodation at the time that these attacks were taking place. And why is that relevant? Well, because the timeline now shifts a little bit with these attacks. The individual believed to be responsible tried to enter the sheltered accommodation, was rebuffed, and I mean, it's absolutely staggering to think of what could have been. I'm going live now, actually, again to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's been in the city, who just brought us that eyewitness testimony. Mark, thank you for joining us. What is the very latest where you are then?
Well, I think still trying to piece together this timeline, which has got a little bit more muddled, I think, in terms of where we are, because Obviously, we know, according to the police, in terms of the two students who were stabbed to death, not too far from here, just a few streets away. That was actually at about 4:04 this morning, when you consider that the emergency calls were received by the police at 4:04. Then it seems to have been a considerable time, more than an hour later, that Jason Derbyshire, who I was speaking to here, one of the residents at this facility, said he saw this man, heard him knocking on the window in the bedroom next to his, looked out the window. He said he looked at his phone at that time, which told him that it was 5:15 in the morning. Now, what we don't know is, with regard to the third stabbing victim, Ian Coates, when he received his fatal stab injuries, was it before, as it perhaps seems likely, that this suspect then tried to get into the particular residence here? Because we know, for instance, that the incident that unfolded down in Nottingham city centre on Milton Street there, where I've been for the last day and a half, that was after 5 in the morning, probably around about 5:20 in the morning. So it seems that after he was prevented from getting into this facility, and then that van that he had maybe taken earlier from Ian Coates, after Ian Coates was fatally stabbed, was used to drive into the city centre and to run over these other pedestrians. See, that's just what we're sort of juggling about, knowing some of the key times that are out already, and from the information that's coming from Jason Derbyshire, who seems to be pretty adamant that it was 5:15 in the morning, because he's specifically wondering what the noise was and who could have been there, looked at his phone, as so many people do, just to check what the time was, and he said at that point it was 5:15 in the morning.
Police custody at the moment, as we understand it, Mark, is a West African migrant who may have been known to authorities but is not currently cooperating with authorities, from what you can gather?
No, the information that we've got is that he's not being cooperative, at least in the earlier part of today. I don't know how things have progressed as the day has gone on, but we don't believe that he'd been cooperating from the moment he'd been arrested yesterday until certainly earlier on today. The counter-terrorism detectives from Terrorism Command, the regional unit that's based up in this part of the country, is still liaising with Nottinghamshire Police. That was confirmed by Home Secretary Suella Braverman in a statement to the Commons a little earlier. She said that they would continue to be there to offer assistance in the ongoing investigation until they are sure that there is no terrorist motive, and they say that they can't rule that out at this time. They are keeping an open mind. Just because they've found no evidence thus far of a link to terrorism doesn't mean that there isn't one yet to be uncovered. So for the moment at least, those counter-terrorism detectives will continue to assist their colleagues here in Nottinghamshire.
Absolutely. Mark, thank you very much for all the latest there. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Just to reiterate as well, the eyewitness involved in this, Jason Derbyshire, who was living at this particular house that was attempted to be entered by the man who's believed to be responsible for what's been taking place in Nottingham, said, "This is a culture shock to me, it really is. You don't expect that on your doorstep. Horrendous, absolutely horrendous." And it ties into something that I think is a broader issue than the horrific scenes that are taking place, which is basically lawless Britain and essentially the massive decline that I think we see in society at the moment. And this idea, really, how safe are you on the streets? Well, as we remember, and we're going to take you to a vigil just after 4 p.m. of the 3 people who sadly lost their lives in this senseless attack. Certainly 2 of those just teenagers. The parents absolute nightmare, and your heart just goes out to these people now who had to get that horrific news yesterday. You try and do everything right as a parent and raise your children in the right way and then send them off into the real world for university, and then just like that, something utterly, utterly depraved, and they're snatched away from you. I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it? But we'll be returning, obviously, to the latest from Nottingham, as indeed we get it, loads of unanswered questions, which hopefully we will get some answers to you over the course of this show. Just a reminder of the breaking news this hour, though, that the chair of the Privileges Committee that questioned Boris Johnson about Partygate himself attended a drinks party during lockdown. Let that sink in. The chair of the Privileges Committee that questioned Boris Johnson about Partygate himself attended a drinks party during lockdown. More on that shortly. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Well, at 4 o'clock, I will take you live to Nottingham, where there will be a vigil held for the victims of yesterday's attacks. But in the meantime, Philip Schofield might have left ITV last month, but the scandal caused by his relationship with a younger male colleague rumbles on. And the channel's chief executive, Carolyn McCall, was questioned about Schofield by MPs today. And she said the presenter repeatedly denied he was having an affair.
With evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. We worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals.
Well, I am joined now for more on this by Fleet Street legend Nigel Pawley, friend of the channel, friend of the show. Nigel, great to see you. Well, what do you make of all of this? Do you think that this is going to quieten down the scandal or just ramp it up again?
I think it's going to ramp it up because there's an old saying about deputy heads rolling, Patrick, and it's pretty clear from what I was saying that it's not going to be her head that's rolling over all this. If you notice, though, I mean, I thought she had a very interesting style. She seemed to dame-splain with her hands like she was talking to children. She was talking to MPs. She was talking to senior legislative elected officials, and she was talking to them like she was talking to her children. I thought that was quite interesting. But what she did say, Patrick, was that I thought it was key. She said that nobody on the board would have turned a blind eye to something as serious as this. In other words, it ain't us, Gov, it's those other ones down at This Morning and ITV, lower down, who turned the blind eye. Because she's saying, by those words, that someone turned a blind eye, and it wasn't her. So, you know, sad to hear that Schofield's having counselling, and it's obviously he's struggling, and I think he should be left alone. But this isn't about Schofield now. It's about the cover-up. It's about who knew and why they... I mean, she said today, Patrick, that there wasn't an investigation. About a couple of weeks ago, they said there wasn't an investigation. Now it's a review. People who were accused of bullying, making complaints. Now it was a staff survey. Has anyone ever filled a staff survey in, honestly, without fear of it not being anonymous? She left more questions than answers, and I think there's going to be a lot of questions heading her way, especially the share price still tanking and 58% down what it was when she took over.
Well, so she was asked, apparently, do you think you should keep your job? To which she says, I do. Then she was asked about her pay. She says that she receives a base salary of just under £1 million with additional long-term and short-term bonuses, which, frankly, ramp it up somewhat, don't they? It comes down to a question of believability, does it not? She's saying that Philip Schofield repeatedly denied somewhere in the region of 12 times that this was happening. But actually, is that good enough? If you're in a major corporation, should you not maybe have done a little bit more as a duty of care to everybody involved? Do you think she's actually cleared anything up here?
Well, I don't think so. She gets 3.5 million, by the way. But no, it didn't clear it up.
Sorry, I'm just off to ITV.
the whole joke of it, Patrick, is she's saying it was speculation and gossip. If you have to ask someone 12 times, that's pretty strong speculation and pretty strong gossip. If they quizzed Mr. X, the runner who was taken in, 12 times. Now that's more than just chat over the coffee machine that Patrick's seen the runner on GBNews, or not. You're not, obviously, but you know, if that was a rumour, you might chat about it, but you wouldn't be quizzed 12 times. That's quite serious, isn't it? That's more than just speculation. So I didn't think she was very plausible, and I know she also accused ex-presenters of having a grievance. A lot of people leave television shows, a lot of people leave newspapers. I've left newspapers. I don't particularly have a grievance against them. I know that I work for some good people and some bad people. People I respect, like Eamon Holmes, people I respect, like Dr. Ranj Singh, who made bullying complaints that were dismissed, apparently. Eamon, I don't think, needs to say anything. He's proved it all in television and in media. He doesn't need to make this stuff up as a grievance. I think he's been down the line there with his true feelings about it. So I was a bit unimpressed. And John Nicholson, more importantly, John Nicholson, who's a shrewd SNP, I say shrewd SNP, he's one of the shrewd SNP politicians, a man who's worked in the media, who knows what it's like to be behind the camera and on camera. He has got people who have said this is toxic. He claimed, I think damning, that This Morning staff described their listeners, or their viewers, sorry, as tower block traces. That's not a good thing for people who watch a programme to hear, that they're being demeaned and looked down upon.
Absolutely. No, it's damning and it's devastating and it's dismissive, actually, of exactly and the audience that people like at that time slot that they're on. They want people who are sitting at home in the day, by definition. And you should worship and cherish these people. They pay your massive wages, OK? They want to be entertaining. You have a duty to entertain them and provide them with good content. You certainly shouldn't be calling them names and being derogatory about them behind their backs. Look, Nigel, I'm very sorry about this, but I have just had something a little bit breaking, which I'm going to have to go to, my good man. But I will talk to you again shortly. That's Nigel Pawley there, who's a Fleet Street legend. Thank you. I will talk to him again shortly. Look, as you were hearing just about 10 or 15 minutes ago, Guido Fawkes, the news website, are reporting that Privileged Committee member and Partygate inquisitor Bernard Jenkin, shock horror, attended lockdown drinks gatherings himself. This is a guy who was in charge of, well, the old Boris Johnson inquiry. Joining me now is Conservative MP Michael Fabricant to react hot off the press to this big breaking news story. Michael, thank you very much. I mean, this is shocking stuff.
It is shocking because Bernard Jenkin, my colleague Bernard Jenkin, actually chaired the Privileges Committee inquiry and gave a very pious and some might say sanctimonious speech about how rotten Boris Johnson was for attending a party at a distance where there was a cake. And if this information that's breaking from Guido Fawkes is true, in a much smaller room, he did much the same. If it's true, we all don't want to be sued. If it's true, it is, of course, the most incredible hypocrisy. Because if you recall, it was Chris Bryant who originally chaired the committee. He stood down because he said that he was biased. It then went into the hands of Harriet Harman and Bernard Jenkin, who actually was the deputy chair to Harriet Harman, not actually the chair, I'm reminded. He then gave a sanctimonious speech, as did others. And of course,
let me put this to you, Michael. Michael, let me put this to you. This has just landed in front of me right now. It's a quote from Boris Johnson. He says, this is about Bernard Jenkin. This has just come through to me. He says he has no choice but to explain his actions to his own committee for his colleagues to investigate and then to resign. I mean, does this cast a complete doubt over everything that may or may not be found against Boris Johnson and highlight potentially what Boris Johnson was suggesting, which is that this was a kangaroo court?
Well, I mean, many of us, I was there when Boris Johnson gave his evidence, and the body language of the committee members was disgraceful. One or two of them behaved in a dignified way. Others were sort of nodding their head in disagreement with the evidence that Boris was providing. They are supposed to be jurors. They're supposed to be a proper court, not a kangaroo court. And some of them behaved, I'm afraid, as if it were a kangaroo court. But what this does is throw considerable doubt into the findings of the committee. You know, one of the things that many MPs find incredibly irritating is the sort of sanctimonious way in which the Privileges Committee at times behaves. And when we hear that one of the key members of the committee, the senior member on the Conservative side, was apparently, if Guido Fawkes is correct, breaking exactly the same rules, but in fact in a much smaller room, then really, you know, it casts a doubt on the veracity of the whole report.
Well, there you go. I mean, should this report just be thrown out? Should Boris Johnson kind of rescind his resignation? Should he maybe be apologised to formally by Bernard Jenkin?
Well, I certainly think that Bernard Jenkins should apologise because, and I keep saying, if it's true, because if it's true, my gosh, you know, the hypocrisy is incredible. And Guido, in his report, which is just breaking, says, cast your mind back to Bernard Jenkins. He says this to Bernard Jenkins. Cast your mind back to December 8th during lockdown. Do you remember attending a drinks party in Parliament held by Eleanor Lang? Bernard Jenkin replies, I didn't attend any drinks parties during lockdown. Guido says, but it was your wife's birthday celebration. Are you saying you didn't have anything to drink? Bernard Jenkin then says, oh, I don't recall. And then bother to go on about it now, but there's evidence that, in fact, drinks were served.
Look, Michael, thank you very much for making the time for us at short notice and really emphasising how you feel, and I think echoing the way that a lot of people feel about this whole thing. And if indeed it is true, the hypocrisy here, you can almost taste it, a little bit like a drinks reception at your wife's birthday party. Thank you very much. Michael Fabricant there, of course, soon to be Sir Michael as well, it must be said. So here we go. We've had a very, very, very busy first hour of this show. We've got loads more to come, though, because a care home resident has told GB News that the suspect in the Nottingham attacks tried to break in at 5:15 yesterday morning, and a vigil is about to take place in the city in honour of the victims, which we will, of course, be bringing to you live here on this show. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, and we are Britain's news channel. I will see you very, very shortly. Don't move. Fast-paced show, this.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, the big read, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News. Shocking new revelations about this Nottinghamshire attack that took place yesterday. 3 people sadly lost their lives. Grace Kumar, Barnaby Webber and, of course, as well, Ian Coates. And there is a vigil taking place to those individuals as we speak, and we can bring you live images of that right now. That is at the University of Nottingham, where those 2 teenagers were attending their studies, walking back from a night out. Hundreds, quite possibly thousands of people all gathered to pay their respects to all 3 of the victims, by the way, but crucially, given that this is at the University of Nottingham, one would imagine there, to those 2 fellow students. We're going to be taking that vigil live, but we We also just heard as well, didn't we, from an eyewitness exclusively here on GB News about the individual believed to be responsible for these attacks trying to break into some sheltered accommodation. This alters the timeline somewhat. I will be giving you the very latest detail on that as we get it. In other news as well, we're going to be talking about this quite devastating topic, which is about a homeless military veteran who was left to freeze to death on the streets. He was asking for sheltered accommodation himself. He was desperate to try to get into the warmth. This is back in 2021. Instead, he was just given a sleeping bag and allowed to freeze to death on the streets of Britain. Why are we able to find accommodation for some people and not our brave military heroes? It winds me right up this. I'm going to be talking about it a little bit later on. And yes, this one broke not so long ago at all. In fact, just a few moments ago. Well, could we be in the realms, who would have thought it, of some party-gay hypocrisy? It's emerged, according to reports in Guido, that Bernard Jenkin, that one of the people charged with inquiring into Boris Johnson, leading to Boris Johnson's resignation, stepping down, etc., well, he may have had a little tipple himself during lockdown at a gathering in a small room for his wife's party. Well, good grief, Boris Johnson himself has spoken out and said that the individual should be forced to account to his own committee and then resign. We're all over this. It's GB News and me, Patrick Christys. We'll get those emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. We are going to be keeping you right up to date with the latest on those Nottinghamshire attacks. Still so many unanswered questions about the individual believed to be responsible. We'll try to get some answers for you in the coming hour. But now it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. Well, the very latest from Nottingham is that police have now formally identified all 3 victims of the Nottingham attacks. School caretaker Ian Coates was the 3rd person fatally stabbed in Nottingham yesterday. His van was stolen and then used to target others. 19-year-olds Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar were also killed in attacks. And a 31-year-old man with a history of violence is still being questioned by police. And CCTV from Sealyhurst House residential care home showing a man trying to enter a window is being examined by detectives. Earlier, GB News spoke to Jason Derbyshire, a resident from that care home who was an eyewitness.
To the curtains, and there was just some guy stood under this archway, all dressed in black, got a black rucksack, black beanie hat on, just staring at the edges over there. Gone back in my room, had a wash. 30 seconds later, there's really loud banging, trying to get through that window. I didn't see the security guard come out, but apparently he did. The guy asked him, is it a hospital or a hostel? He went, no, it's a hostel. And then he just came back through this archway and just walked off there, dead calm. So yeah, it's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. How someone can do that, I don't know. I really don't know.
Let's take you live now to Nottingham University. As you were hearing earlier on, there is a vigil taking place within the university grounds. It's a vigil for the 2 19-year-old freshers of that university, first-year students Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar, who lost their lives in the Nottingham attacks yesterday. Prayers will be said, there will be speeches, and of course, there will be tears. It's being reported locally that families of the students, Barnaby and Grace, are expected to be present at that vigil. Now, in other news today, a Home Office minister says the government will provide more legal routes for refugees to enter the UK. Lord Murray of Blidworth says new routes could be implemented as soon as the end of next year. That's after more than 9,000 people crossed the Channel in small boats so far this year. ITV's boss says both parties involved in Philip Schofield's affair repeatedly denied allegations that they had a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall has told MPs action would have been taken had there been any evidence, but there was only ever rumour. ITV bosses also say they do not recognise claims of a toxic culture at the This Morning programme.
With evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. We worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals.
News on the economy now, and stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth in the UK. The latest figures show it expanded by 0.2% in April. That's recovering from a 0.3% fall of the previous month. The Office for National Statistics says the positive impact of improved hospitality and retail spending was offset by industrial action hitting other sections. Thousands of NHS appointments and operations are being affected by a junior doctor's strike in England. Union members have walked out for 72 hours over an ongoing dispute. The British Medical Association is asking for a full restoration of pay, which it says has seen a 26% cut. They've so far rejected a 5% offer. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says it is a fair and reasonable offer.
I think a 35% pay rise to many of your viewers is seen as something that's out of step with what they themselves would be receiving. So we had talks with the junior doctors. The junior doctors walked away from those discussions, even though we brought in the intermediary that they asked us to do. And we made them an offer, 5% plus a lump sum, in line with what's been offered for paramedics, for midwives, for nurses, for many others with the NHS. And today, unfortunately, the junior doctors have refused to move at all from their demand for 35%.
Health Secretary Steve Barclay there. You with GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
Yeah, let's go straight to Nottingham, I think, where a vigil is taking place following yesterday's attacks that sadly left 3 people dead. 2 of those individuals were Nottingham University students, Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar. What you're looking at now is the vigil where a moment's silence, a period of silence really, has already been held. You can't quite see it from that camera angle, but thousands of people are out there to pay their respects. It follows a vigil last night at St Peter's Church in Nottingham, where a lot of people, mostly students, went to lay wreaths and flowers and light candles. It's also really, as well, I think, worth noting that the other individual involved in this, it's not just Nottingham University students who were involved, because Ian Coates, who's a man who was in his 60s, was also killed in this ridiculous atrocity that took place in Nottingham when it is believed he was stabbed to death, dragged out of a van, left in the street, before that van was then driven into a group of 3 other people waiting at a bus stop, one of whom remains in a critical condition. But these are images, as we pan around, emotional scenes, this, from the University of Nottingham, as students gather to pay their respects to their 2 colleagues, many of whom would imagine were their friends, who were just walking home from a night out to celebrate the end of their first year at university, walking home together at around 4 o'clock in the morning when they were confronted by an individual who just took their lives in a senseless, horrific, violent act. And yes, there we go. It's just emotional scenes at the vigil there in Nottingham, at the University of Nottingham, as students gather to pay their respects. We will keep going back to that vigil. It's quite an emotional scene. Apologies that everybody. Anyway, so tributes have continued to flood in for the 2 talented first-year students and a school caretaker who were stabbed to death during a deadly rampage in Nottingham. Students Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber, who were both studying at the University of Nottingham, as I've been telling you about, were sadly found fatally knifed in the street by police on Tuesday morning. The 3rd victim, school caretaker Ian Coates, has been described as a much-loved colleague who always went the extra mile for the benefit of our children. His son Lee said on Twitter that he is broken, while his father Phil said, I can't sleep trying to understand what happened. Let's go live now to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who is in Nottingham and not so long ago brought us an exclusive line with an individual who was in some sheltered accommodation in Nottingham. And this is really the development today, isn't it, Mark, which is that the individual who's believed to be responsible for these attacks, who's in police custody, tried to gain entry, it would seem, into some sheltered accommodation. And let's be honest, people missed out on potentially being more victims by a whisker, by luck, really, Mark.
I think there's no doubt about that, Patrick. We were aware of 4 separate crime scenes until this afternoon. Those crime scenes, of course, being that original crime scene on the road leading up to the student accommodation where these 2 19-year-olds, Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar, were stabbed to death. Then, of course, that second crime scene, Magdala Road, not too far from where I am, where Ian Coates was stabbed to death. The third crime scene being the spot in Milton Street in Nottingham city centre, where 3 members of the public were run over by this stolen van that belonged to the victim, Ian Coates. The fourth crime scene being the point where the police stopped that stolen van, tasered and arrested their prime suspect. Now we have a 5th crime scene as confirmed by Nottinghamshire police. The crime scene being this residential home for people with complex needs and vulnerabilities. They were inside here. It was 5:15 in the morning, according to one of the residents here, Jason Derbyshire, who I spoke to in the last hour. Understandably very emotional as he's processing exactly what happened. He heard banging on the window of the room right next door to his. He looked at his mobile phone at that time, as so many of us would do when you're woken up, and he saw it was 5:15 in the morning at that time. He looked out through the window and could see an individual by this time on the other side of the street by some bushes, looking into the bushes, dressed all in black. That man then apparently came back, started banging on the window again to try to get in. According to Jason, he said the man didn't look agitated, but nonetheless, it was, you know, a clearly alarming incident for him, regardless of what he later went on to find out, which was a terrible sequence of events across Nottingham that have now been linked to this individual. And that realisation, I think, from Jason, that the man who was trying to get in to this residence complex, care home, if you like, was indeed, according to the police, the same individual who had killed and was perhaps in the process of still killing one another, of running down people in Nottingham city centre, that had he got inside this building, then who knows what the consequences might have been, because, as I say, by its very nature, this facility looks after those with very complex needs, people who by their very nature are vulnerable and susceptible and not best perhaps prepared to defend themselves. So, you know, all of that he's processing the shocking news. As he said, he's a father. So he's processing the fact that 2 teenagers have been stabbed to death in this incident as well, and clearly very emotional, Patrick, at what he is, having to process.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you very, very much. I believe we might actually have a little clip of that individual, Jason Derbyshire, that we can play now. So this is Jason talking to Mark a little bit earlier on about his shock and just the enormity of the situation. Let's play the clip.
In the curtains, and there was just some guy stood under this archway, all dressed in black, got a black rucksack, black beanie hat on, just staring at the edges over there. Gone back in my room, had a wash. 30 seconds later, there's really banging, loud banging, trying to get through that window. I didn't see the security guard come out, but apparently he did. The guy asked him, is it a hospital or a hostel? He went, no, it's a hostel. And then he just came back through this archway and just walked off there, dead calm. So yeah, it's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. How someone can do that, I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, he was clearly shaking there, absolutely. Now, very shortly, Mark, I'm going to be taking our viewers live to this vigil that's taking place at the University of Nottingham. Of course, 2 of the people who lost their lives yesterday were students, just 19 years old. A lot of people are saying flowers, candles, you know, sentiments are just not enough anymore with what's been going on here. So many unanswered questions, so much anger, really, about how 3 lives, 2 of them, of course, you know, just starting out university, can be extinguished in this ridiculous, senseless act. And you broke it live here on this show yesterday. The individual, GB News understands the man is a West African migrant as well, Mark, and I believe that we kind of want a bit of an update on all of this. What's the latest?
Well, as far as we know, this individual, this prime suspect, has not been cooperating with detectives in police custody. That clearly makes the ongoing investigation that much more complex for those detectives, because if he's not cooperating, he's not going to be giving them the likes of the code to get into his mobile phone, passcodes for a laptop if he has one, and that will hamper them in efforts to try to see if this man is linked to any other individuals who might have extremist or violent beliefs. So for the time being, counter-terrorism officers are continuing to be part of this investigation until they know for sure. But yeah, I mean, we've been here so many times before, whether it's terrorist related or whether it is an isolated incident for some other motive, terrible tragedies that affect communities like Derby, and the shock, of course, that's felt in a community like this, a vibrant city full of many young people attending these 2 very renowned universities in this particular city. And the vigil, of course people are angry and they want questions, but we shouldn't really undermine the importance of a vigil either, because they are important. Given that, you know, we are shocked, members of the public who are not from Nottingham, who hear about these events, we are obviously rightly repulsed and saddened and shocked by what's taken place. But for people in this community, it is a horrific series of events, and especially for those at the university who will have known these people, these 2 young students with their whole lives ahead of them. One young girl who wanted to be a doctor, who was on this medical degree to follow her father's footsteps into practice as a doctor, and that life snatched away from her. Her fellow students, his fellow students, their tutors, all of them just want that opportunity to try to process these absolutely horrific events that unfolded just yesterday morning.
Our Home and Security editor. The images that you're seeing on your screen now, if you're watching us on TV or online, is this vigil taking place at the University of Nottingham. And I've just had some information in front of me here that the families of the 2 University of Nottingham students who sadly died have attended a vigil in Nottingham, are attending the vigil, as we understand it. Thousands of University of Nottingham students there attending that vigil to Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, both aged 19, who were stabbed to death on Ilkeston Road. I'm just going to see if we can hear anything at the vigil at the moment. I will shut up for a second and just see if we can hear anything. We might not be able to, but let's just see. OK.
Let me formally welcome you.
We'll just get...
Welcome you to the proceedings this afternoon. Thank you once again for your patience. This is one of those moments that we hope to never encounter, but which forces its way into our lives and leaves a trail of destruction that we could never imagine. Thank you for being here, students and staff of the university, community members, most especially the family and friends of our precious Grace and Barney, who have travelled many hours to be with us. You're going to hear from a few university representatives this afternoon, but the main point of being here is for us to talk with one another, not to be talked at. To begin to process our grief, our feelings of trauma as individuals and as a community. So I'm going to invite our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Shearer West, to address you now.
Thank you, Grant. And thank you, everybody, for attending the campus vigil today. In particular, may I welcome the family members and loved ones of Grace and Barnaby who have joined us today. I'm grateful that so many of our staff and students have gathered together to remember Grace and Barnaby. It's hard to find the words to express the shock and the grief felt across our institution at the senseless loss of two talented students who've had their bright futures brutally curtailed by a seemingly random act of violence. What should have been a time of celebration and relaxation following the exam period has become a time to mourn tragic loss in the most unimaginable of circumstances. Grace was a medical student, thriving in her first year of study, and inspired by a career in medicine, by work placements in a GP surgery, and her volunteering for the nationwide vaccination program during the COVID-19 pandemic. She was a talented sportswoman, playing international hockey for both under-16 and under-18 England hockey team, and Essex under-15 women's cricket. Barnaby was a history student with a particular interest in geopolitics of both the USA and China. His tutors recall his energy as a student and as fun, friendly, and full of life in seminars. He too excelled in sport as well as his studies, playing hockey, rugby, and cricket for his school and local clubs, and excelling at sports at Nottingham. The warmth and extent of the tributes paid to Grace and Barnaby by their schools, their tutors, their teams, and their teammates over the past 24 hours are testament to the regard in which they were held by so many across our university community and far beyond. The university is supporting Grace and Barnaby's families at this immensely difficult time. David, Emma, and Charlie, Sanjoy, Sinead, and James, on behalf of the University of Nottingham, may I express our deepest condolences. Support is also available for students or colleagues who've been affected by this tragedy. This is a time when our community truly comes together to help each other, a hallmark of our Nottingham family. Against this backdrop of the deepest sadness and loss, I hope that in time we can draw some comfort from the thousands of messages of support and condolence received locally, nationally, and indeed globally in response to this dreadful crime. But today our university and communities across Nottingham are united both in our grief and our remembrance of two of our much-loved students. The University of Nottingham is a sadder, less bright place today, without Grace and Barnaby. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Daisy from the Student Union now.
Sure. I think this is the last place that any of us wanted to, or expected to be on a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of June. It's been hard to comprehend what's happened to this city and to our students in the last 36 hours. What should have been one of the biggest celebrations for the student body has turned into one of our darkest days. But the messaging and support I've seen from so many of you, the way you have stuck together, held each other up and shared support has been both inspiring and heartbreaking to witness. Barney and Grace are a monumental loss. They were both first years with ambitions, potential and dreams. What was taken from us yesterday will never be given back, and the shockwaves echo through our student community. To the School of Medicine and the Department of History, I send my love and thoughts to all of your students and staff who have suffered the loss of two intelligent, enthusiastic and passionate students. To all of the friends and peers who lived with Grace and Barney or who would have done next year, we are here to support you and we will continue to be here for you during your time at university and beyond. To the sports clubs, who are the backbone of so many of our student friendships and communities. You have lost two terrific players and two amazing friends, and I am deeply, deeply sorry. There's no way I could possibly list all of the people who are affected by this tragedy, both within and outside of our campus, which just demonstrates how deep the bonds that hold our community together are. And I would like to express my most heartfelt and sincere condolences, sympathy and solidarity to the families and closest friends of Grace and Barney. I cannot possibly comprehend the grief and pain that you must feel today, but please remember that you have the students standing behind you, and as a university community, we will always be here when you need us. I stand here also aware that the impact of this situation goes beyond our campus, and my thoughts are with the family and friends of Ian Coates, those injured and all those affected directly and indirectly by these events. Whether you're here to remember the friends you have lost or support those who are hurting most, this is a devastating time for the whole student body, and we all stand together. It's okay to cry, but it's okay not to, and in whatever way you are responding and processing these terrible events, please continue to support each other as you have done so amazingly in the last few days. We are here with you and we are here for you. Thank you.
OK, so what we are listening to and watching now is a vigil taking place at the University of Nottingham.
University chaplain, and on behalf of our chaplaincy team, I'd like to extend to the families especially our very sincere and heartfelt condolences. We have chaplains who have come in especially to be here today as part of this event. Words are never enough to express the depths of how we feel during these sorts of moments. There's a pervasive sense of loss, a smothering sense of grief. Two hopeful and bright lives extinguished in the most horrific of ways, taken from us unjustly and without warning. And these sorts of events trigger in us changes that we can barely imagine. Changes as individuals and as a community. And they catch us by surprise, often many months or even years down the line. But the most pressing question is always why? Why did it have to happen? Why Grace? Why Barney? Why now? Why? The truth is that we may never find answers, because the answers are often elusive to us. And anyway, simplistic answers that just make us feel better just won't do. No. Instead, we need to enter into our feelings, to interrogate them, both as individuals and as a wider community, to talk about them with one another. If we don't, if we bury them, we risk them returning eventually with even more destructive power. You've already been encouraged, students, to make use of the support opportunities, and I'd like to add my voice to that encouragement. Please do. There are many, many people around you willing to listen, support, encourage. Please do make use of all of us. By doing this, together we can grow through the pain and the horror. In truth, the pain never goes away. But we learn ways to cope with it, ways to become more hopeful, more determined to make our society caring and safe. And I think that is probably what Grace and Barney would want too. We're going to go into a brief time of reflection. It's going to start with a minute's silence. And at the end of that, Daisy and Sean from the Sports Centre are going to light each of these candles in memory of Grace and Barnaby. There are then some formal bouquets which will be laid by members of the university, starting with Professor West, with Shearer laying on behalf of the university, and then others will come forward and lay those bouquets on the shelf behind us. Thereafter, there are some individual flower stems that are available to students and staff of the university, and many of you have brought your own flowers with you. And we'd like to invite you, when it's appropriate, and I will let you know when that moment arises, to lay those flowers on the fountain behind us at the top of the steps. So to walk around here and to lay those flowers. There will be a few more instructions as we go, but I'm not going to confuse the issue with those now. If we could just take a moment of silence, it'll be a minute, and if I could invite Daisy and Sean to come and stand with me. And at the end of the minute of silence, we will light the candles and then begin the flower laying process. Thank you.
Okay, so what we are witnessing here is the vigil, specifically in this instance for the students of Nottingham University, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, both aged 19 years old, who were killed on Ilkeston Road as part of those depraved and senseless attacks across the city centre. As you've heard from the university chaplain and the representative of the student union, there was also another individual, Ian Coates, who sadly lost his life as well. And it's important to remember Ian and those who were injured in that attack. 3 people also injured after a van careered into individuals at a bus stop. One of them remains critically ill. The parents, the families, I should say, of the 2 University of Nottingham students are, we understand, in attendance of this vigil at the University of Nottingham. We were hearing about what a gaping hole that those 2 students will leave in that university and in the lives of all of their departments and their friends. Of course, they were going to be going and living with them next year when they moved off campus. Flowers are going to be laid in an organised manner. There's going to be a few more speeches as well. But we heard a bit about Barnaby and a bit about Grace. And Grace played for England at hockey at a junior level and Essex at cricket as well. Barnaby as well, another keen sportsman who had a vivacious appetite for learning, especially when it came to the geopolitical structure of the world. He was studying history at the University of Nottingham. And earlier on, you could hear as well just the sobbing in the background as thousands of university students gather to pay their respects.
I now invite Shearer to come and lay the bouquet of flowers on behalf of the university. And we have representatives from the schools of medicine, life sciences and history.
Is flowers being laid at the fountain, which is just outside what's known as the Portland building there in the University of Nottingham in their main campus. And the various different faculties are approaching that fountain, laying flowers of remembrance for Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, both aged 19, who were students at the University of Nottingham. And I want to emphasise as well,
representatives of the hockey and cricket clubs.
It's primarily for the students of that university, but they have really been able to stress as well that their thoughts spread beyond that campus to the family and the friends of Ian Coates, who sadly lost his life in this attack as well, and all those who were injured. The flowers continue to be laid. We've had a moment's silence. We've had some tributes as well. And what we're looking at there is what appears to me anyway to be some ladies there in what looks like hockey kit. And we know
lastly, the Student Union.
Hockey player. Emotional scenes there as the flowers continue to be laid. What the chaplain was saying as well was this question, why? Why? And this really is exactly where we are. People wanting answers, people feeling desperately sad about this situation. He said, we may never know the reasons why
we have
this
condolence
happened.
books available.
I'm just going to go back now to see if we can hear the University Chaplain
building behind me, and in the chapel lounge on the lower ground floor of the Portland building. They will be there for an extended period, and so they do not need to be completed now. But if you would like to do that, we would also at the end of this time like to invite you to go to those spaces. If we could please be cognizant of the number of people that are present and maybe wanting to write in the books, and if you can come back at a later stage, then please do that. You will notice that the books are actually separate sheets of paper with two boxes, one labelled for Grace, one labelled for Barnaby. If you would write what you would like to write, the message that you would like to write on a sheet of paper and then put it in the appropriate box, they are going to be collected together and collated and bound into condolence books. So that will be right at the end of this time. I'm now going to ask those students and staff who have access to a single stem flower if they would like to make their way around to the back of the fountains here and lay those flowers at that point.
So what we've had so far is a representative of the Student Union and an individual as well who I believe may have been the Vice-Chancellor of the university, but I'll get that confirmed, giving heartfelt speeches and expressing their condolences to the families of Barnaby and Grace, who, as we understand it, are both in attendance at the moment. The university chaplain is kind of orchestrating proceedings. There was a moment's silence, and sadly now all the individuals who, it would appear to me, were sporting colleagues of, especially Grace in this instance, who we know that played hockey for the university, and indeed England at a junior level, are being handed single-stem flowers. And they are going to place them at the back of a fountain at the University of Nottingham there, and incredibly emotional scenes. A lot of them turning up there in their sports gear and try and pay their respects to Grace and to Barnaby Webber, both aged 19, who were walking home from a night out in the early hours of yesterday morning at around 4 o'clock in the morning on Ilkeston Road when they were set upon by an individual in a completely, it would appear, random and senseless attack, and were sadly stabbed to death. That individual then went on, and the timeline of this remains a little bit hazy, but went on and took the life as well of Ian Coates, and then proceeded to drive a van into a group of people at a bus shelter. That man is in custody. He's 31 years old. He's been arrested on suspicion of murder. As we understand it, is not cooperating with police as yet. But these are live shots from the vigil at the University of Nottingham as students, parents, members of staff lay flowers in remembrance. And the words of the university chaplain there, I think, really ringing in a lot of people's ears, which is the senseless nature of it and the why of it all. And what they want is answers. Those answers, sadly, may never come. But I think the hardest hitting bit for me listening to all of this was the representative of the student union there, who really encapsulated just the tragic loss of what could have been. Two young people with incredibly bright futures ahead of them, who had had a cracking start in life, were academic, were sporty, were outgoing, were much loved. And you only have to see the thousands of people gathering here at the University of Nottingham now, this endless procession of love, of sorrow, of flowers, to realise how well loved these people were. I believe that what we are also seeing in the background there are some members of the family of the two university students who sadly lost their lives. But just that loss of what could have been. They were in the prime of their lives, 19 years old, studying for their degrees with big ambitions. Grace wanting to go on to be a doctor, to go and save lives, to go and help people, to have a life of service. Sadly snatched away in a moment of utter senseless brutality. For what? For what? For nothing. And Barnaby Webber as well, a lover of history, who was enthralled by the geopolitics of America and China. That's something that I know a lot of our viewers and listeners can relate to here as well, who really had the whole world at their feet. And I think that hammers home, doesn't it, just the depravity of this situation. And you look at the sorrow and the misery that all of this has caused now, and you have to really question what on earth it was all for. And those answers hopefully will be forthcoming, if indeed there are any. And of course, I think once the emotion settles down, maybe the word why could well be replaced with the word justice. And justice needs to be done. Something needs to be done about this tragic and completely senseless loss of life that we've seen. What we're looking at now is some male university students walking up to pay their respects as well. There's a strong presence of sports gear here, because we know as well, don't we, that Barnaby and Grace were keen sports men and women. Grace particularly involved in cricket and in hockey, playing hockey for multiple different England age groups and for the university, and cricket as well for Essex under-15s. Barnaby, his cricket club, had already paid tributes to him as well, and just said what a tragic loss of life it is and how dearly he will be missed. And the procession is continuing really at the University of Nottingham here. Flowers really piling high now. They're taking single stem flowers, and what the chaplain was saying as well was afterwards what they're going to be able to do is pay their respects by writing little messages in a box. I'm just going to see if we can just take some of the audio from this now, because it would appear to me anyway that this is possibly the families of those two students who are queuing up now to lay their flowers. And it is actually quite eerie. We were taking audio from that, and it is remarkable to think that that crowd of however many thousand people have gathered there just falling completely silent and letting the enormity of this situation sink in. I think it is worth at this point just sparing a thought as well for the families of Barnaby and Grace. Every parent's worst nightmare, this must be. Absolutely every parent's, every brother's, every sister's, every family member's worst nightmare. You're going about your business and then one evening or one early morning you get that horrific phone call. One can only imagine what's going through their heads as they try to process what has gone on and the sense of loss and just what could have been, really. And I think everybody's hearts go out to the parents, don't they, as they pay their respects now to Barnaby and to Grace. It has been a devastating incident. Just to recap as to what we know about what happened so far, and the timeline of this is slightly moving. the individual is in police custody, believed to have been responsible for this string of attacks around the city centre. At around 4 a.m. in the morning yesterday, Grace and Barnaby were walking back down Ilkeston Road in Nottingham after a night out. They were celebrating the end of their first year when they were set upon and attacked in the street. There was a statement that was released yesterday by the University of Nottingham, which reads, "We are devastated and shocked by the news of the deaths of 2 of our fellow students in this horrific incident in the city centre last night. We stand in solidarity with all of our students and the wider community." I'm going to take you back to this vigil now where the university chaplain has continued to talk, I believe. I was just asking people to continue with the flowers. OK, I'll continue with this statement then. "We stand in solidarity with all of our students and the wider community, and our thoughts are with the families and the friends of those who lost their lives and the injured, alongside those directly and indirectly affected by the unfolding of these terrible events. We encourage anyone affected by this news to reach out for support." And that is exactly what is happening. There's been a massive political response to this as well. Suella Braverman was speaking in the House of Commons a little earlier today, just saying what a devastating situation this is, also saying that counter-terrorism police are aiding and assisting with the investigation, but at the moment it is not being treated as a terrorist incident. The very latest that we had earlier here on this channel with Mark White, our Home and Security editor, was he spoke to a man who was in some sheltered accommodation at the time of this attack, and the attacker himself was trying to break into that sheltered accommodation. And I think really that emphasises the absolutely devastatingly random nature of what we're seeing here. It happened to be Barnaby and Grace. Out of anyone, it just happened to be those 2 individuals. And what I believe we're looking at there is hugs now amongst the parents and the family members, emotional scenes, deeply distressing scenes, this. Deeply distressing scenes. What on earth must that family be thinking at the moment, these families be thinking? But the completely random nature of this, it could have been anyone. It could have been the people that were in that sheltered accommodation. It could have been these students. It could have been other students. It could have been people like Ian Coates. It's important not to forget Ian Coates in this situation as well. He is the man who was a caretaker at a local school, who was just going about his usual morning routine, driving a van to work when he was attacked in and then outside that van. At the University of Nottingham, which is where we're looking at now, if you're just joining us, this is a vigil for the 2 students at the University of Nottingham, both just 19 years old, who lost their lives in that attack earlier this morning. But the university was coming to a period of celebration originally because it was the end of the year. And it was the graduation ball that was due to take place yesterday evening. And instead of going to that graduation ball, instead of celebrating the end of the academic year and at the end of, in Grace and Barnaby's case, the end of a first year at university, we end up with a vigil last night at St. Peter's Church and then another vigil, which we're looking at now at the University of Nottingham outside the Portland building. And it is just an incredibly disturbing situation that we are witnessing at the moment. There are, of course, still so many unanswered questions about this. So many unanswered questions. While Suella Braverman did today confirm that counter-terror police are involved in the investigation, it is not believed to be a terror attack. GBNews does, of course, understand that the individual involved at the moment who's suspected of carrying out this attack is a West African migrant who had potentially been known to the police. And question marks now will be raised as to what police knew and exactly the circumstances that rose there, but now isn't really the time for speculation as we just look at the deeply emotional scenes here of university students coming together to try to grieve and pay their respects to their university friends and colleagues alongside the families of those who sadly have lost their loved ones. A much-loved son in the shape of Barnaby, of course, who was a keen sports star and played a lot of cricket and was studying history at the university, and Grace Kumar as well, who was studying at the university and was training to be a doctor, would have had years left, of course, at that university there, training to study to save lives and to be a lifesaver. I mean, little could they have known as they walked home from that nightclub yesterday that everything would change, frankly, forever. We're just looking now, continuing to look at this vigil as flowers are being laid, and the families of Barnaby Webber and Grace Kumar are attending that vigil. The latest line that we have had here at GB News, which was something that broke just as I was coming on air, was that bizarrely the individual who's believed to have been involved in this tried to gain access, climb through the front window. This is mid-attack of Sealyhurst House, it's called, on Mapley Road, and that was around 5 o'clock in the morning, which is believed to be about an hour after the initial attacks took place. He was rebuffed, but again, as I was trying to say before, I think what that shows really is the completely random nature of this. We spoke exclusively to an individual who was in that sheltered accommodation, who has spent all day just thinking about how it could have been him, and it could have been anyone, really. I'm going to go to Mark White now, who's our home and security editor and has been at the scene of this since news broke early yesterday morning. Mark, what we are witnessing right now in this vigil is every friend, every brother, every sister, every mum, every dad's worst nightmare playing out in front of our eyes. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've seen over the years many such vigils after terrible events, and I think the relatives of those caught up in these terrible events fall into two categories. There are those who want to be alone and who want to just process the very terrible loss that they're feeling out of the glare of the public, and there are others who are just incredibly brave. I'm not saying that those who want to shy away from the media glare are not brave. It's not what I'm saying. Of course, they're entitled and should be, you know, afforded the opportunity to grieve. But it is incredible, those relatives who are processing the most fundamental loss of a loved one, that still they find the courage to come out into a very public place and a public space like this, not just surrounded by hundreds, even thousands of people at that university campus, but they are under the glare of the media spotlight now being...
I'm just going to cut across you, Mark. Sorry about this. I'm just going to go back to the vigil because I believe these may well be the parents
my baby boy.
Victims, but we'll listen to what they say.
I can't even comprehend how I'm going to deal with it. Myself and Emma and Charlie and all his family and friends. Well, I know Barney will be super touched by everyone that's here, and he loved it. He loved it here. He couldn't wait to come back. Drove me mad, but his heart will be with you guys forever. And thank you so much. I really can't talk much more, so I'm going to pass it over. Thank you.
Everyone here, really want to thank you for your support, for taking the time to be here. All of you guys, everywhere that I see of people. Such a lovely sign of the university and the bond you have. Grace was also like Barney. She loved coming up to Nottingham. In fact, we couldn't get her down. I said to her last week, come down, and she said, well, after she's had a few more sessions. You know, I used to call them her crisis meetings. But, you know, the love that we have out here, I just wish we had it everywhere. So, look after each other. It's the big thing, is that look after your friends, and look after people around you. This is so important. I think Grace and a friend, they fell together. And you need to be friends with everyone, and you need to love everyone. And I wish we had more of it. But most of all of you guys, everyone who's here, who Grace may not have even touched, I really thank you for being here and taking the time. I really do. It means so much to Sinead, my wife, and me. She loved being here, and she loved all of you. She really did. And you should all feel very blessed. She was so full of her stories and things that she said about all of you. You all touched her life, and hence ours. You'll never be forgotten by us, certainly. We have children who were taken away prematurely from us. That should never happen to any parent. But all I can say to all of you guys is that thank you for things you did for our daughter and Barney. And look out for each other. Thank you.
Clearly incredibly overcome by emotion, as I imagine everybody watching this as well. Grace's dad gave a longer statement there, saying how he could hardly manage to get her back from Nottingham. She loved it so much there as a university student, and really the message would be that those young people, thousands of whom are in attendance at this vigil now, need to love each other, need to stay friends with each other. He said that there's not enough of that going on in the world. And I'll just drop back in now because this is the university chaplain who's continuing to pay their respects.
And the chapel will be open every day over the next 7 days from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. If you would like to find a quiet space for a moment of reflection or prayer. And it just then remains for me to say thank you so much for coming, to show your support to the family and friends and to be a community together. We are going to ask if you would allow the family to leave first. If you would like to stay around this area and just have a quiet time around the fountain, then please do so. If you would like to sign the condolence books or write a message in them, they are available in the Welcome Hub and the Chapel Lounge. God bless you. Thank you for coming.
OK, so the vigil, it appears, is finishing now. Students will continue to pay their respects. Just in terms of what we've witnessed for about the last half an hour or 45 minutes, university chaplain, a representative from the university, as well as the representative of the student union, all gave very, very moving tributes to Barnaby and Grace, epitomising what wonderful, outgoing, loving, caring individuals they were, with a thirst for life as well as academic learning, it would appear, both of whom very, very keen sports people as well. And look, frankly, saying what you can all see from the pictures of them, which is that they had their entire lives ahead of them and the entire world at their feet before that was snatched away in just this utterly, utterly appalling incident that happened in Nottingham yesterday. We then had a procession of flowers being left at the fountain outside the Portland building at Nottingham University's main campus. Those were laid by representatives of the various sports clubs that Barnaby and Grace were a part of. We then had a statement, incredibly moving, really, wasn't it? As indeed it all has been, from the fathers of both Barnaby and Grace. Barnaby's dad was understandably a little bit too overcome with emotion, but just wanted to express his thanks, really, for everybody for turning out to pay their respects. But Grace's dad spoke a bit more length, just really saying how much she loved the university and her studies there, and that actually it was really difficult to try to get her to come back home because she loved it so much. And his overbearing and overwhelming message was that people need to cling on to their friends and really value that. As rounds of applause are ringing out across the university campus in Nottingham, as the families of Grace and Barnaby leave, there will be a service later on. Thousands of people gathering there. I'm going to go to Mark White now, our Home and Security Editor. Mark, sorry I cut you off there, but I think it was important that we heard from the fathers of the two student victims in this. Important as well not to forget Ian Coates, who sadly also lost his life in this attack. But Mark, I was asking about the why of it all, and do we know anything else yet at the moment whatsoever about any developments in terms of the attacker, alleged attacker, or the circumstances that have led up to what we're witnessing right now, which is, let's be honest, devastation?
No, the why of it all, we don't really know at all. There is no real indication as to what the motive was for what seems to be such a selfish and brutal act that took place in the early hours of yesterday morning in the area around this part of Nottingham, and then, of course, down in the city centre, and, of course, those family members, like us all, processing just what happened and the loss of a loved one. But for them, of course, much more keenly felt. And how much emotional resilience does it take for Dr. Sanjoy Kumar, the father of Grace Kumar, to stand up there and pay that incredible tribute to his daughter, who wanted to follow in his footsteps and become a doctor in the medical profession as well. How much emotional resilience did it take for David Webber to stand up there, his voice breaking, his unable at times to continue? Such was the terrible impact of the loss of his son, Barnaby, or Barney, as he was referred to by his student friends here in Nottingham, as they both paid tribute to these young people that had a whole life ahead of them, that could have gone on really to accomplish the most incredible things. As I say, Grace, that wanted to follow her father into the medical profession, and Barney, who had a keen interest in history and politics. He was very interested in geopolitics, for instance, so who knows what particular path that interest may have taken him in the years ahead. Ian Coates, well, he was 65-year-old and approaching, in a sense, the twilight of his life, but still snatched away from him way too early. But these two young students, the emotion of that vigil, as we've seen, of course, with many similar vigils in the past, but this was so very raw, and so much more so given that the family members took that very brave decision and chose to attend, to be amongst those who loved and cared for their loved ones, to show how much they appreciate that, and to share their thoughts about how very special their loved ones were to them.
Mark, thank you very much. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who I'll be talking to about more of the facts as we understand them and the timeline of events and what's led up to what you are witnessing right now, which is the University of Nottingham's main campus. Thousands of students grieving, mourning, in shock, paying their respects emotionally to their two friends and university colleagues. We did hear, of course, unbelievable that they managed to attend and actually do that, but from the respective fathers of Barnaby and Grace. More on this story, if there are any developments, in this Nottingham attack, we will bring them to you right here on GB News. You have just been watching and listening there to the vigil for Barnaby and Grace. It's just important as well, again, to emphasise, as was emphasised by numerous people during that vigil, that important not to forget the other victim in this, of course, as well, Ian Coates, who was stabbed to death as well. And at least one person who's in a critical condition after being struck by the alleged attacker's van, and the 2 others who were also injured. It's important not to forget them in all of this as well. Look, more on this when we come back, as well as a whole host of the day's other news stories as well. But just in the meantime, I'm going to whiz you over now to Polly Middlehurst with all of your latest bulletins.
Patrick, thank you. Well, as you've just been watching, a vigil has been held for the victims of yesterday's attacks in Nottingham. Let's take you to the scene where thousands of people are still milling around after the ceremony. It was held at the University of Nottingham following the deaths of a 19-year-old medical student, Grace O'Malley Kumar, and a history student, Barnaby Webber. School caretaker Ian Coates has been named as the 3rd person fatally stabbed in the Nottingham attacks yesterday. His van was stolen and then it was used to target others. Speaking at the vigil, the Students' Union representative Daisy Forster said both students will be dearly missed.
What should have been one of the biggest celebrations for the student body has turned into one of our darkest days. But the messaging and support I've seen from so many of you, the way you have stuck together, held each other up and shared support has been both inspiring and heartbreaking to witness. Barney and Grace are a monumental loss. They were both first years with ambitions, potential and dreams. What was taken from us yesterday will never be given back, and the shockwaves echo through our student community.
Daisy Forster bravely speaking at the vigil for the students at Nottingham University a short time ago. Meanwhile, detectives in Nottingham are investigating CCTV footage of a man who appears to match the description of the Nottingham attack suspect, attempting to enter a window at a residential care home. The incident wasn't reported to police at the time, but no residents were hurt. One 31-year-old man with a history of violence is still being questioned by police. And GBNews spoke to Jason Derbyshire, a resident from that care home, who was an eyewitness.
With the curtains, and there was just some guy stood under this archway, all dressed in black, got a black rucksack, black beanie hat on, just staring at the edges over there. Gone back in my room, had a wash. 30 seconds later, there's really banging, loud banging, trying to get through that window. I didn't see the security guard come out, but apparently he did. The guy asked him, is it a hospital or a hostel? He went, no, it's a hostel. And then he just came back through this archway and just walked off there, dead calm. So yeah, it's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. How someone can do that, I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, in other news today, a Home Office minister says the government will provide more legal routes for refugees to enter the UK. Lord Murray of Blidworth says new routes could be implemented as soon as the end of next year. That's after more than 9,000 people crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. ITV's boss says both parties involved in the Philip Schofield affair repeatedly denied allegations they were having a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Karen McCall has told MPs action would have been taken had there been any evidence, but there was only ever rumour. ITV bosses also say they don't recognise claims of a toxic culture at the daytime TV show this morning.
With evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. We worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals.
Thousands of NHS appointments and operations are being affected by a junior doctors' strike in England. Union members have walked out for 72 hours over an ongoing dispute. The British Medical Association is asking for a full restoration of pay, which it says has seen a 26% cut. They've so far rejected a 5% pay offer. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says it is fair and reasonable.
I think a 35% pay rise to many of your viewers is seen as something that's out of step with what they themselves would be receiving. So we had talks with the junior doctors. The junior doctors walked away from those discussions, even though we brought in the intermediary that they asked us to do. And we made them an offer, 5% plus a lump sum, in line with what's been offered for paramedics, for midwives, for nurses, for many others with the NHS. And today, unfortunately, the junior doctors have refused to move at all from their demand for 35%.
That's the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, speaking there. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
OK, well, welcome back. Now, a vigil has been held at the University of Nottingham. Incredibly moving vigil following the tragic knife and van attacks, which left 2 first-year students and a school caretaker dead. They were stabbed to death during this deadly, senseless rampage. Medical student Grace O'Malley Kumar and history student Barnaby Webber were both found fatally knifed to death in the street by police on Tuesday morning. Now, a third victim was Ian Coates, a school caretaker who was 65 years old. His van was stolen by the suspects and then used to drive into pedestrians, injuring 3 people, 1 critically. The families of the victims attended the vigil along with thousands of students and members of the public to pay their respects.
I'm lost for words. I've lost my baby boy and I can't even comprehend how I'm going to deal with it. Myself and Emma and Charlie and all his family and friends. Well, I know Barney will be super touched.
OK, that's the father of Barnaby there. Let's go now to our Home Security Editor, Mark White, who's in Nottingham. Mark, yeah, OK, so look, I mean, you actually spoke to an individual today who was in a residential home that the alleged attacker was believed to have tried to access mid-spree, as it were. Look, I've got to be honest with you, my overwhelming sense here is anger, actually, really, at the moment. So I am going to throw it over to you. But what do we know about the timeline of events? And also, crucially, what answers are we getting about why on earth this happened?
Well, until about lunchtime today, we'd known about 4 different crime scenes. So there was Ilkeston Road, not far, less than half a mile from here, where Grace and Barnaby were stabbed to death just after 4 a.m. in the morning. The first 999 calls going in to the emergency services at 4:04 in the morning. Then the police talk about the incident in Magdala Road, that they later found the body of Ian Coates also stabbed to death, but they haven't given a timeline for that. If they know the time that that particular stabbing happened, they haven't shared that with us, but we know, according to the police, that Ian Coates' white van was stolen from that second crime scene and used in a third crime scene, which was Milton Street, right in the heart of Nottingham city centre, where 3 members of the public were run over by this van, 1 man still in a critical condition in hospital this evening. Then there was the 4th crime scene, the spot just half a mile up from Milton Street, where the police stopped this van at gunpoint, dragged the driver out, tasered him and arrested him. Now, from lunchtime today, we get information that this hostel for vulnerable homeless people was also potentially the target for this prime suspect, that he had been knocking on the window trying to break in to the hostel itself, and we're told that this was about 5:15 in the morning. Now, why are we so sure of that? Because one of the residents, Jason Derbyshire, quite emotional as he's processing all of this and realising that he and his fellow residents here came very close to potentially being victims themselves. He had looked at his phone at the time he heard the banging on the window and looked out of the window and saw it was 5:15 in the morning. Let's listen to what Jason Derbyshire told us.
Opened the curtains and there was just some guy stood under this archway, all dressed in black, got a black rucksack, black beanie hat on, just staring at the edges over there. Gone back in my room, had a wash. 30 seconds later, there's really banging, loud banging, trying to get through that window. I didn't see the security guard come out, but apparently he did. The guy asked him, is it a hospital or a hostel? He went, no, it's a hostel. And then he just came back through this archway and just walked off there, dead calm. So yeah, it's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. How someone can do that, I don't know. I really don't know.
And clearly, I mean, he was, very emotional, because I think just the shock of what he was subjected to, just, clearly just being woken up at that time in the morning is an unpleasant enough experience, and frightening in itself. But then when you take into account what he now knows, the horrific murders of these two young students and Ian Coates, he said, you can't help but feel absolutely shocked and emotional. He said, I'm a father, and at that point, he just broke down a bit, and fully understandable, Patrick.
Yeah, Mark, look, thank you very much for bringing us right up to date with the timeline of events, the facts as we understand them, and a whole host, unfortunately, as it currently stands, of unanswered questions, but questions that I think when you look at the raw emotion that are on the parents' faces there and the faces of all of the friends and the other family members of Grace and Barnaby, we haven't obviously seen Ian, his family yet, but the answers, they've got to be, these questions have got to be answered. Look, Mark, thank you very much. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor there. You can get more on this deeply moving story on our website, gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got the best analysis, opinion, and, of course, all the latest breaking news. We're going to move away from Nottingham now. We have been covering that at length, and we'll be no doubt returning to that at some point later on. But there has been some big breaking news during the course of this show to the apparent Partygate hypocrisy which has surfaced in the last hour. So, strap yourselves in. Boris Johnson has called on the Privileges Committee member Bernard Jenkin to resign after reports emerged about the Partygate inquisitors' attendance at lockdown drinks gathering. Here's a statement from Boris. He said, if this is true, and the allegation is that he attended a drinks party, if this is true, it is outrageous and a total contempt of Parliament. Bernard Jenkin has just voted to expel me from Parliament for allegedly trying to conceal from Parliament my knowledge of illicit events. In reality, of course, I did no such thing. Now it turns out he may have, for the whole time, known that he himself attended an event and concealed this from the Privileges Committee and the whole House for the last year. To borrow the language of the committee, I mean, this is gold, isn't it? To borrow the language of the committee, if this is the case, he must have known he was in breach of the rules. Why didn't he say so? He has no choice but to explain his actions to his own committee for his colleagues to investigate and then to resign. And you know the sanctimonious, self-serving way in which a lot of these people in this committee decided to treat Boris Johnson? Well, you know what? Here we are. GB News' political reporter Catherine Forster has the latest. If this turns out to be true, this is absolutely shocking.
Well, Boris Johnson was very cross last week when he decided to resign, wasn't he? Kangaroo court, he called the Privileges Committee. We're expecting this committee report that's been being worked on for over a year onto the gatherings in Downing Street and whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament to drop about 9 o'clock tomorrow. It's 30,000 words, compiled by this cross-party group of MPs, including 4 Conservatives, one of whom is Bernard Jenkin. Now, Bernard Jenkin allegedly attended a lockdown drinks gathering for his wife in December 2020, when London was in Tier 2 lockdown. Such gatherings were not allowed. There was apparently cake, there was drinks, there was nibbles. Cake. There was not social distancing. So, understandably, Boris Johnson is incredibly angry.
It's the cake for me that does it.
And in the last hour or so, Nadine Dorries, who, bear in mind, said she was going to resign and still hasn't, has written to the clerk of the Privileges Committee about Bernard Jenkin, and he has referred the matter to Harriet Harman, who is chairing the committee. So I think we will be hearing a lot more.
Harriet Harman herself has previously expressed, some would argue, deeply biased views about Boris Johnson and his conduct. And then you end up in a situation where one Bernard Jenkin may well have, the whole while he's there, casting aspersions on Boris Johnson, presumably have had some inclination that he'd allegedly attended a drinks party with cake as well. And you just think, you know, hang on a minute, what on earth is this hypocrisy? It'll be interesting to see how other news outlets go after this, won't it, really? But Guido Fawkes, who broke this story, also said that they had contacted Dame Ella Lang, the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons. She conceded that she held a business meeting on the evening. I was so strict with my 2-metre rule and told everyone we will adhere to the rules and be very careful. Yeah, OK.
Well, yes, of course, it turns out that this was a drinks party for Baroness Anne Jenkin, Bernard Jenkin's wife, so not by any means necessary. And in a separate development, also being reported, that the Privileges Committee are looking into taking disciplinary action against the Conservative MPs that have come out saying how badly the Privileges Committee have behaved, and maybe taking action against, among others, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg for calling it a kangaroo court.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, what has to constitute a kangaroo court? I mean, at what point does it go from a kangaroo court to a wallaby tribunal? I mean, you look at this now and you think, well, if there was an individual who was fronting this up who had to recluse themselves because they were so deeply against Boris Johnson, so that has something that had to happen. And then you've got another individual there who has cast massive aspersions on Boris Johnson. Then you've got somebody who comes out and it turns out may well have been attending their wife's drinks party as, by the way, Sir Michael Fabricant MP on this very show in the last hour was keen to point out allegedly took place in a much smaller room than any of the incidents that Boris Johnson was being accused of. You do have to wonder whether or not any of the verdicts that are being reached by this committee or any of the negativity that's being heaped on Boris Johnson should be taken with any kind of validity whatsoever. Boris, no doubt, will be making this very argument, and supporters of Boris Johnson who've thought that this was a witch hunt, thought it was a stitch-up, well, could only have to look at this now, don't they?
And certainly, when Boris Johnson made that shock announcement last Friday night that he was standing down, anybody that hoped that, OK, well, that's going to be the end of Boris Johnson and now we can move on, is going to be very sorely disappointed, because this row is just generating more and more heat. And Nadine Dorries now is apparently thinking that maybe she won't resign just now. Maybe she might hang on for a few weeks. So they can't get the by-elections out of the way. This could drag on, this by-election mid-bed into the autumn. And, of course, all the while, these Conservatives fighting amongst themselves. But it's just... Keir Starmer must be thinking this is fabulous.
Just want to remind everyone of these rules. You know, on December the 8th, 2020, London was in Tier 2 lockdown. Gatherings of more than 6 indoors, either in public or private buildings, were against the regulations. There was no Christmas exception whatsoever. I mean, it is absolutely staggering, isn't it, really? And it does just make you think, all those people who sit there so holier than thou and sanctimonious, and you think, you know what, one day it'll be you. And maybe in the case of Bernard, it actually is. And in fact, I don't mind saying this, my phone is lighting up at the moment in front of me with some individuals who are quite keen to talk to me about Bernard Jenkins. So let's just watch this space, ladies and gentlemen, OK? Anyway, thank you very much, Catherine. It was great to have you on the show. Catherine Forster there, who's GBNews' political reporter. Right, loads to get through now. Thousands of junior doctors across England have gone on strike again today. Is it time for them to get real and stop demanding a 35% pay rise? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, health bosses have warned that the NHS in England is facing major disruption as a result of the hot weather, combined with a junior doctors' strike. BMA members walked out this morning for 3 days of action. Now, it's the third strike in the ongoing pay dispute and is expected to lead to the cancellation of multiple appointments. Joining me now, live in the studio, is junior doctor and former Miss England winner is Dr. Basha Mukherjee. Dr. Basha, thank you very, very much. Great to have you in the studio. Now, you're not on strike.
I'm not on strike in terms of I'm not going to work. I am going to be going to work, but right. I do support the strike. For personal financial reasons, I am unable to strike.
OK, all right. And a lot of people will be quite concerned about the fact that the junior doctors are demanding still a 35% pay rise. I mean, that is, some people say, too much.
I mean, it's... if you look at the figures in terms of the steady decline in how much we were getting paid compared to inflation in 2008 compared to now, we're not asking for that much more. We've had a 26% decline, really, where other industries have had a pay rise, and we've not been given the same amount of pay rise at all to match up with inflation. So this isn't, I mean, from 26% to 35%, it's actually not even 10% rise that we're asking for.
OK, all right. You do get a rather good pension, though, don't you?
pension is a really long way away, and the junior doctors, we're all struggling with our day-to-day life.
Would you be willing to take less of a pension contribution and more upfront pay?
Well, no, because
Right.
we have to think about the people who have been here before us. The doctors who were junior doctors 10 years ago were getting paid better than us and for the same pension rate. And they had better perks for, I mean, we're working with a struggling NHS. And as you know, after COVID, it's become really difficult. And with the cost of living, we've got much more adversity that we're facing. And we've paid
Is
more
everyone,
in
just
fees.
to say, is everyone not facing more adversity, though? You know, are a lot of people out there just in the real world struggling to pay for their weekly shop from Lidl, not
Is
facing...
everyone else not striking as well?
Well, not people whose job it is to save lives, maybe.
Well, we're doing our job as much as anybody else, and, you know, we have bills to pay as well. We've gone through really grueling education and, you know, it's an emotionally straining job, physically, mentally straining job. So our job demands a lot more.
You think your job is more important than other people's?
Well, isn't that what you're saying as well, that our job is to save lives? If it's important that we turn up to work, then it's important that we get paid to compensate us for our time.
What is the pay?
Well, the pay rise that we're asking for, and actually it's only fair that, you know, we get paid, you know, in comparison to other countries like Australia, America. We just want to be paid fairly. That's what we're asking for.
OK, just going to drill down on that. If you did get a 35% pay rise, what would your wage be?
Well, I haven't calculated it myself, but
You know it would be enough.
Well, here's the thing. It's difficult to say this is enough and that's not enough. But I know that this...
It's impossible, by the
This
sounds
has
of it.
been a debate that's been ongoing, and we've been forced to strike and repeatedly strike because we feel that our voices are not being heard. We've only been offered a 5% increase where Scotland's offering 14%. I mean, at least match up to Scotland and England. I'm not saying 14% is enough either, but equally, I think what we're asking...
What are you on? What are you on now?
Me personally, I wouldn't like to disclose that.
OK, but if I was, with respect, if I was in intensive care at the moment and was potentially about to die and I didn't get the care as a result of that, and I asked the doctor who was striking what they were on now or what the pay rise that they were striking about would make them earn a year, I probably would expect an answer to that.
It's not about the actual number, it's more about the principle. It's the principle of valuing the doctors and their time and valuing them in comparison to what the value of doctors was 10 years ago, and valuing us in comparison to other industries, but equally in the same way that we're the public sector and we are giving, you know, a much better service than many other parts of the world. And, you know, the quality of doctors in the UK is very good compared to many other parts of the world. And we're losing doctors as a result of not giving them the fair treatment, essentially, whether it's financially or otherwise.
OK, all right, look, thank you very, very much. It's been great to get your views on that. It's Dr Basha Mukherjee there, who is indeed a junior doctor and a former Miss England winner. Look, loads more to come between now and 6 p.m. In just a few minutes, I will discuss the tragic case of an RAF veteran who died from hypothermia after he was forced to sleep rough. But first, it is your news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Let's bring you up to date then with the latest news headlines. And a vigil has been held for the victims of yesterday's attacks in Nottingham. Thousands of people attended the ceremony held at the University of Nottingham following the deaths of 19-year-old Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber. School caretaker Ian Coates was named as the third person fatally stabbed in the attacks yesterday. His van was stolen and then used to target others. Speaking at the vigil, Students' Union representative Daisy Forster says both students will be dearly missed.
What should have been one of the biggest celebrations for the student body has turned into one of our darkest days. But the messaging and support I've seen from so many of you, the way you have stuck together, held each other up and shared support has been both inspiring and heartbreaking to witness. Barney and Grace are a monumental loss, They were both first years with ambitions, potential and dreams. What was taken from us yesterday will never be given back, and the shockwaves echo through our student community.
Daisy Foster speaking a short time ago. Well, detectives meanwhile are investigating CCTV footage of a man who appears to match the description of the Nottingham attack suspect attempting to get into a window of a residential care home. The incident wasn't reported to police at the time and no residents were hurt. A 31-year-old man with a history of violence is still being questioned by police. In other news today, ITV's boss said both parties involved in the Philip Schofield affair repeatedly denied allegations they were having a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall has told MPs action would have been taken had there been any evidence, but it was only ever rumour. ITV bosses also say they don't recognise claims of a toxic culture at the daytime TV show This Morning. Those are the headlines. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Numbers stacking up like this. The pound will buy you $1.2694 and €1.1691. The price of gold, £1,542 and 4 pence an ounce. The FTSE 100 has closed the day at 7,602 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Now, I've been banging on for some time now that we treat illegal immigrants better than we treat our military veterans. And I make no excuses for that. It makes me feel utterly furious. It is a shocking injustice. And it's been revealed that a military hero who fought in Iraq, carried Princess Diana's coffin and was the Queen's personal footman froze to death on the streets because we couldn't find him a bed for the night. Malcolm Livingston tried to get a night shelter twice, but he was just given a sleeping bag and a blanket, and he was found dead in a churchyard from hypothermia. It was sub-zero temperatures that night. Malcolm was in the RAF, but unfortunately he struggled with PTSD, like so many people do, and eventually, again like so many veterans, turned to drink to cope. But before his turn for the worse, he'd been responsible for managing all the household staff at Buckingham Palace and was in charge of the monarch's travel arrangements for domestic and overseas tours. He is a man who fought for this country, who has been damaged by his service, has continued to serve our late Queen, who carried Diana's coffin as she was repatriated, who kept our royals safe. And what happens? When he needed our help, he was tossed a sleeping bag and allowed to freeze to death outside. It actually makes me shake with rage. Malcolm is by no means the only veteran unable to access help, unable to get housing. There are thousands of homeless military veterans and thousands more who suffer from combat-related medical and mental illnesses. People will watch this now and they will say, I can hear them practically, oh, it shouldn't be a case of veterans or illegal migrants getting housing. Yeah, fine, I agree with you, it shouldn't be. But it's not my fault, is it, that the reality is people coming over here illegally apparently find it's a lot easier to get free bed and board in lovely hotels at the taxpayers' expense, backed up by a load of bleeding heart liberal lefties, than people who have given everything for this country. It's not my fault, I didn't do that, I wish it wasn't the case. I reckon there's a good chance that Malcolm would have been happy to spend the night at a hotel in central London, the same one that some asylum seekers camped outside in protest. I reckon he'd have been all right for a few nights on one of those barges that Rishi has made us all pay for people coming across the channel. It's shocking. Our priorities are all wrong. The money is there. The accommodation is clearly there. We know that because we're giving it to people. We're just not giving it to the right people. We should put homeless veterans first. Well, those are my views. Yes, those are my views. Of course, you can get in touch now, gbviews@gbnews.com. I am joined now by former British Army soldier and veterans campaigner, is Trevor Colt. Trevor, thank you very much. So, I'm very angry about this, Trevor, and I wanted to highlight this story. I've been wanting to for a couple of days, but the news agenda obviously has overtaken events somewhat, which I'm grateful for you to understand. But look, I mean, you've seen this story as well. What do you make of it?
It's a travesty. First of all, I'm going to say thanks for having me on. It's always good to be on this channel. I'm angry that this has happened. Now, you got to bear in mind that back in November 21, the government put out an emergency pandemic crisis where they wanted to get all rough sleepers off the street. Well, would not have been the perfect time that when you got all rough sleepers off the street to find out if they were veterans or not? It would have been the perfect time to write down their army service number, where they served, and then we would be able to have a proper indication of how many homeless veterans we have, but we didn't. We ignored it. And the one thing that makes me angry is the fact that, believe it or not, Patrick, I'm sure all your viewers know, in England and Wales alone, there's 1,818 military veterans charities. In Scotland and Northern Ireland, there's 444. That's 2,200 odd charities. And what are they doing? They've got £1 billion at any one time sitting in their accounts. But you know what? The CEOs are too greedy. They've got their own agendas, their own expenses accounts, and the veterans normally come last. They really do. Unless you're SAFA, who actually work extremely hard to get veterans off the street.
Like anything, you raise a great point there, Trevor, which is it is not just the government when it comes to this, because, look, you know, there are charities out there that no doubt could probably be doing a little bit more. My main focus on this, and I make no excuses for this, is genuinely about that contrast between the way that we treat people who've just come over here on a dinghy and our veterans. And for people shouting at their screens now or on Twitter later who go, well, it shouldn't just be an us or them thing, that's fine. I wish it wasn't. It's not my fault that it is. But it exposes the fact that we've got accommodation and we've got money and we've got a will and we've got a political group of people who are banging the drum for people who've just arrived in this country illegally, as opposed to people like Malcolm who fall on hard times, who are left to freeze to death in a churchyard.
Patrick, do you know what? You raise a valid point. Now, I want to put this out there. I'm not too sure if I mentioned this before, but I wrote to my local MP, Teresa Coffey, a couple of years ago, and I said about utilising an empty military barracks for homeless veterans, which could get them off the street. We could bring in veterans which cooked, which cleaned, which did, teach them trades, get them back on to getting benefits and back out onto the street. And she forwarded my email on to Tobias Elwood, who's high up at the MOD and can do a lot of things. And Tobias Elwood's response to me, and I'm willing to send you the response, Patrick, I have it here. Tobias Elwood says, we cannot give these barracks to veterans. They do not belong to us. They belong to private investors. However, they were able to find, they seem to find these empty barracks for asylum seekers and all the rest of the scum that arrive on our shore, and they leave our veterans. They exploit and destroy our veterans. There's thousands of them out there still waiting on compensation, and the government are too heavy-handed to help them out. It's a travesty.
But could you talk to me a bit, and obviously we'll go to Tobias Elwood for confirmation on all of this, as we usually will, but could you just talk to me a little bit about the actual problem with veteran homelessness? Because I think a lot of veterans are too proud to admit that they've got an issue. There's a lot of sofa surfing out there, tragically, alongside some of the very natural mental health issues that can come with seeing the horrors of active service. Then there can be self-medication in place as well, alcoholism, etc., which can be a thing, right? What is the reality? What is the reality of veteran homelessness? How much of a pressing issue is this?
It's getting worse. And what's happening is we have lots of great service personnel, regardless what service they're in. They come back from war, the ones that have seen trauma, and they're damaged. And it eats away at them. What you will not do, Patrick, if you have trauma, you will not share it with your wife or your children, because the last thing you want to do is actually ruin their mind. You don't want to give that burden to the people you love the most. So what you do is you keep it in your head, and it eats away at you over time. Over time, you will try and reach out to other veterans. You do drink, you go out, you start drinking. Things start to change at home. You end up having no sex life.
Oh, that's a shame. We've lost Trevor, unfortunately. Well, he was painting the picture, of course, wasn't he, there, of what can happen to people who are just out from active service there, and the problems that can occur to them, and how easy it is for veterans to fall onto hard times. And there should be a safety blanket there. There should be a safety net. If you are just joining us, it is, of course, that horrendous story about former RAF veteran Malcolm Livingston, who had a distinguished career in the military. I believe Trevor is there. Trevor's back. We've got you, Trevor, I believe. Sorry, yep. Trevor, just to say, so you were saying it's easy for things to fall apart at home and then you end up homeless.
Yes, Patrick. Well, if you come back from a war scenario and you are damaged, you do not want to share that burden of trauma with your wife, your loved ones around you, and it eats away at you inside. When it eats away at you inside, your marriage starts to break away. You don't have the same connection anymore. You maybe get agitated when you go out, and things start to drift apart. And what happens to veterans whenever things start to drift apart? They would rather leave their married home, leave everything for the wife and the kids, make sure they're happy, and they would rather sleep in the gutter than let anything ruin their family. And then there's then there's a struggle to get back from there, and it's getting them before the veterans that are broken, like myself and many others. We need to have somewhere to go where we can actually reach out and people understand. I'm going to be honest, Patrick. There's very few veterans I speak to these days. There's one or two that I speak to that are broken, that understand the pain I have mentally, and I understand their pain. And we meet up for coffees and we chat. But it's very rare to meet up with a guy who hasn't been on the front line with you, who doesn't understand the trauma and the mental in your head. And it's difficult. It's very difficult, Patrick.
Well, look, Trevor, thank you for coming on. Can I just say thank you for being so honest and so open, and I think really giving people, a real understanding, because people like me, it's easy for me to sit here and talk a game. I don't know what you've been through, really. I wasn't there. I never will be, and I'm very grateful that we've got people like you who go out and do the business for us. But you should be looked after more, and people like you, Trevor, should be looked after more. I just want to say thank you very much, and I'll chat to you soon. All right, take care of yourself. There's Trevor Cook there, who's a former British Army soldier and veterans campaigner. I wanted to just highlight yet again the disparity between the way that we treat people who've fought and served this country and people who've just rocked up in Dover, really. I just find it staggering. Anyway, moving on, one of Donald Trump's senior former advisors says that his latest criminal charges are a potentially catastrophic turn of events. Should he abandon his bid to become the president again? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, on to the latest drama involving Donald Trump, who's pleaded not guilty to 37 federal criminal charges. He's accused of unlawfully keeping documents relating to national security when he left office and allegedly lied to officials who tried to recover them. Joining me now is Trump's former US National Security Advisor, John Bolton. John, thank you very much. Great to have you on. Look, Trump is saying that this is a witch hunt of catastrophic proportions and it's actually doing him a lot of favours in the polls. What's your view?
Well, he may be right on the second part. At least in the short term, he may get a bump in the polls as a result of this. But I think as people understand more clearly what the indictment alleges, they'll see that that if these facts are proven to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what our criminal law requires, just like yours, that Trump's conduct really was a threat to American national security. I mean, the documents that could be at stake here could contain some of America's most important secrets, and his mishandling of the documents put that information at risk.
He says that he didn't have time to look through all of these documents and he wasn't given the time in order to look through all of these documents to weed out which things would have been relevant to hand back and not. And, you know, I mean, what would there have been gained by Donald Trump, do you think, of keeping hold of some of the more serious stuff, really, other than just, what, mementos? I mean, what could he have done with them?
Well, let's be clear that there's a statute that governs what documents go into the public records and what documents are private. There is no definition of a private document that can be classified. So the fact is he's got no excuse for having classified information after he leaves office. And nobody expects the president's going to go through it all. And if he were really concerned, he should have done what other presidents and vice presidents have done, is put it into a process where these documents could be screened. He created some of the problems by refusing to acknowledge he had lost the election. But the real problem Trump has is that after he was informed by the archives and then by a government subpoena to turn over classified documents, he refused to do it. And he not only refused to do it, he lied and caused his attorneys to lie about having conducted a thorough search, which they had not because he removed half the materials from the storeroom. So this is the seriousness of it that he now faces. And I think as people read through the indictment and hear him suggest to one of his own lawyers that he removed documents from the production back to the government to avoid problems. Okay. This is the classic definition of obstruction of justice.
OK, Donald Trump is saying that he's going to completely obliterate the opposition, including Joe Biden, and that in light of the numerous different scandals that were levelled at him in the past, which weren't proven, some of which, of course, were, but weren't proven, there's this portrayal of a man who is being demonised because he's unconventional and he wanted to drain the swamp.
Yeah. Look, this is Donald Trump's style. It's very confrontational. I think it, frankly, demeans American politics. And I think that the risk that we run in this coarsening of the political dialogue is very serious. Trump finds it a successful way to proceed. It's one reason that I and a lot of other Republicans are determined to stop him from getting the nomination again.
OK, all right. Well, look, thank you very, very much. It is always great to get your insight on. I'm very sorry we couldn't be on for a bit longer. We've been overtaken by news events. That's the end of the show, I'm afraid, John. But thank you very, very much. It's John Bolton there, who is Trump's former US National Security Advisor. OK, well, look, it's been an action-packed show and an incredibly moving show, I must say, as well, with us taking that vigil in Nottingham. Jubes & Co. is up next. Michelle Dewberry will be in the studio in a matter of moments. I'll see you tomorrow at 3.
Hi there, welcome to the GB News forecast from me, Aidan McGibbon at the Met Office. Sunny skies for the vast majority this afternoon, and it is very warm once again in many places. Odd shower possible, mostly towards the northwest of Scotland, and some fair weather clouds bubbling up here and there. But otherwise, high pressure remains close by, and that's keeping things settled. It's also keeping things generally cloud-free with the winds coming in from the east. That means eastern areas are a lot cooler compared with central and southwestern areas where temperatures are reaching the high 20s, even approaching 30 Celsius in a few spots. And then overnight it stays very warm, 1 or 2 showers or even a thunderstorm possible for the northwest highlands into the evening, but they clear away. Most places dry then overnight. Clear spells, but some low cloud approaching parts of eastern and central England, some mistiness around the coasts of northern Scotland, and it's a warm, muggy night for some, but it starts off again, sunshine across the board. As we begin Thursday and into the afternoon, it stays largely sunny. Some cloud will build in places, especially towards central and southern areas, and the odd shower again possible as temperatures rise. Once again, mid to high 20s fairly widely. Cooler along that east coast. But later in the day, some severe thunderstorms that will likely develop across the Republic of Ireland are most likely to